Okay, welcome to a live stream from Rome Info Video. Since YouTube claims they're not going to be censoring anymore, I've decided to do some video production live on YouTube, which I haven't done for like 3 years. So this is going to surprise you all, but if you subscribe to FromRome.info, you just got a notice by email. And if you subscribe to this channel, you just got a notice on YouTube. So I see there's already 3 people. Say hello in chat so I can say hello to you. And this gives you a unique opportunity to ask me any question you like about the conclave. That this video live stream will be in the English language. I will not speak in Italian. I did the Italian live stream yesterday morning. And if you go over to From Rome Info Video, my Italian channel, you'll find that discussion there. I know this is kind of late for the East Coast. It's 10 o'clock on the East Coast, but it's only 7 o'clock on the West Coast, and I have a lot of viewers in English-speaking world. Oh, even going as far as Australia, Hawaii. So it might be in the morning. I think it's in the morning in the afternoon in Australia. So, hello, Bill Zabinski from Wisconsin. Okay. Hello, Bill, and hello, Diana G from Brooklyn, New York. You don't have to tell me where you're from. And actually, I encourage you, as a matter of personal security, never on social media tell people where you're from. I don't ask that. And so I ask, if you're going to say hello to me, don't say where you're from for your own personal security. And if you want, erase your comments where you said where you're from. Because hackers use every little bit of information they know about you to target you. And I've been targeted by many hackers over the years. So my name is Alexis Bugnolo, and I will first tell you something about myself, because not everyone who watches this channel knows who I am, or even reads the About page at From Rome, which tells you a lot. I was born in the United States, and I was born in New Jersey. I grew up in Rhode Island, and I currently live with my older brothers when I'm in the United States, in Massachusetts. I actually am in Rome right now, in the apartment, which I call the Hermitage of the Holy Cross, that my readers at From Rome helped me live in. And you'll see that it's pretty sparse with white walls, but I do have a picture of Pope Urban II, Blessed Urban II, who called the First Crusade, and Saint Bruno, the founder of the Carthusians. They actually did meet at Rome during their lifetimes, but that painting is by Zurbarán, painted in the 16th century or 17th century. So they're not wearing medieval clothing, if you want to know what that photo is there. So I'm a Franciscan brother by private vows. I took public vows with the Franciscan Friars of the back in 93. I was with them until 96. I wanted to live the ancient rule, which they didn't live, and the founder wanted the rule lived according to his own opinion, not according to papal teaching. And so I was out of there in the summer of 96, because I don't want to live my life according to private opinion. I want to live my life according to the teachings of Jesus Christ and the papacy. And that's the kind of Catholic I am. And if you read From Rome, you know something about that. So this live stream is about the conclave and its legal problems and how to solve them. I know I've written a lot about this already at From Rome, but there's nothing like a live stream to help people hear what you have to say and ask questions. And because just because it's written doesn't mean it's read, and just because it's written and read doesn't mean it's understood. And there's a lot of issues involved. And I hope that you find your questions answered during this live stream, and that you share it, especially with clergy, because cardinals, bishops, priests are going to be more able to understand the argument, and which I will draw from principles of ecclesiastic jurisprudence, canon law, and the papal law and conclaves. And I'm big on that. You see, I have a copy here of the Code of Canon Law, Latin 19. It's the 1983 edition of the code, but this is a 2004 edition with Italian translation and a commentary by Juan Ignacio Arrieta, who's actually a Monsignor. I think he's still the secretary of the Pontifical Council for the Interpretation of Legal Texts, and he's Opus Dei. And I think it was Opus Dei who published this edition, but I'm not Opus Dei. And I find it's a rather good commentary, although it's really the most basic you can get. And it really lacks for example, it lacks a lexicon. There should be a lexicon of canonical terms in here, but there isn't. But that's the one I use. And the first thing I want to start in this live stream, I see there's 7 of you. Please say hello in the chat, and I'll say hello back to you. And at any time, you can ask me a question, because this is a rather heavy argument, and any little question you ask will kind of lighten it. The real AMR, hey, hello. You're a frequent commentator from Rome, and you always have most people don't know it. From Rome, you can leave a comment. Unlike most websites, I don't filter the comments for ideologic reasons. I expect you to ask me any question about anything, and I even have non-Catholics, non-believers, sometimes Greek Orthodox, ask me questions, as long as you're not going to insult anyone during your question, and you make a useful, or you're sharing a URL and ask a comment and stuff. And I have over 40,000 comments published at From Rome, so there's 1,000 just on the About page. So I'm big at answering questions, because my parents are both instructors. Proclivity to life. Okay, hello. Good evening to you. Oh, Francois. Okay. Yes, Francois, you are a often frequent commentator. And hello, Bella Rock from California's capital. Okay. You don't have to say where you're from, and I recommend for your personal security that you never divulge where you are on the internet. In chat, you can erase that comment if you like, because there are not only nefarious people on the internet, they're now using AI and bots to collect information. And if they know what town you're in, they can, and if they steal your credit card, then can possibly make an invalid transaction, because they'll guess the zip code correctly. And so that's why you should never really say where you are on the internet. But today we're going to talk about the Conclave of May 7th, 8th, 2025, and why it had no valid result, and what has been done about that by the Catholics at Rome, what they're doing about that, and what you need to know. And there must be some first premises for me to discuss this topic, and so that you will understand it and hopefully accept the argument I lay out. We have to discuss first principles. And these are the things you must already know or accept to even be able to comprehend the argument. And the first thing you have to understand is that God exists, and that Jesus Christ is God incarnate. Okay, so I can't prove all that to you. There's not time enough to do all that. This is an argument that Catholics should understand, that Christ is king, and therefore he has received all authority in heaven and earth. And he is the head of the church. The Pope isn't the head of the church, and the Pope can't do anything he likes. That's why he's called the Vicar of Christ. He's not called the Regent. Okay, he's called the Vicar. And the chief teaching of Christ, upon which I'm going to found my entire argument in this live stream, is that Christ said to Peter, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." I think that's Matthew 18:25 or 18:18. I'm not a Protestant, so I can't guess right off the bat what verse it is. Okay, this means that when the Pope establishes a law, Jesus is going to observe that law. And this should put us at awe. This should put us at awe that the successor of St. Peter, in establishing a law, that God himself is going to obey that law. Now, of course, within his authority, as Christ's vicar, as someone who's protecting the deposit of the faith, If the Pope establishes a law that you have to open an egg on the small end of the egg and not the large side of the egg, that's not something that Christ is going to observe, because it's outside the authority of the Pope. So one of the first concepts is ultra vires. It's a common concept in law. Everyone who holds an office only has a limited authority over what he can do. Even Christ, who has all authority in heaven and earth, cannot order something contrary to the will of God the Father. Okay? Not that he would, but he can. So every office has a limit to its authority, and the Pope's authority is limited by the magisterium of Christ. Christ is king. He's also our one master. How to obtain eternal salvation for those of us who are in this world, still being tested. He is the rule of faith, even more than the rule of faith, because the rule of faith in English is how we refer to the whole body of teachings of the Catholic Church, or the teachings of Jesus Christ. But since Christ is the one master, he's the one who lays it out. So when Christ, apostles say, teach us how to pray, and he teaches them the Our Father, no authority on earth can change that prayer. If you change the prayer, then you're really just citing the prayer and mixing it in something else. But not like the absolute psychotic Jorge Mary Bugnolo, who here in Italy changed the Our Father, because they don't say, and lead us not into temptation anymore. They say in Italian, and do not abandon us in temptation, which is not what Christ said. And not only did they change it during the Mass, they changed it during the reading of the Gospel. So when they read the wrong translation during the Gospel, they say the word of the Lord. I walk out of the church because that's complete fraud, because Christ never said those words. And to put them in the Gospel is totally dishonest. But we've arrived at a point in Christian history where people are so darn diabolically proud, they think they can do whatever they will. They're like fallen angels, that the rules of heaven don't apply to them, that they can make up who is a member of the church, who's not a member of the church, and how do you get elected Pope. This is the problem. The most fundamental problem in the conclave is the cardinals believe that they can do whatever they want. We have to accept it. It doesn't work that way. And this is the same crowd that they can believe they can define what love is, and it doesn't matter what biology doesn't matter, morality doesn't matter, the teachings of God don't matter, common sense doesn't matter, science doesn't matter. I was watching a video the other day of some young men being interviewed right before the shooting of Charlie Kirk, and they were ultra liberals. And the guy interviewing them was asking, why don't you think a child in the womb is a human being? And they were absolutely dumbfounded. They couldn't give a reason for their position because they rejected reality, they rejected truth, they rejected God's order. And to someone who rejects God and you ask them the question, they will not respond because they can't. You can't argue with God. You can't create an argument against the will of God. If you try, you'll immediately see that what you're involved in is absurd, because God gave us the light of natural reason, and we cannot not see the absurdity of what is irrational. That's the light God gave us. So the most consistent atheists actually stop thinking, because they know that reason itself is the highest ally of God. And I met a person like that at Rome. He was totally insane, and I asked the neighbors what happened to him. He was a philosopher, he's an atheist, and he decided one day that he couldn't be a true atheist unless he became insane, and he lost his mind from then on. So it is possible. Some people have such a strong will. So in regard to the conclave, we have to know that if we're going to be Catholic, sincerely Catholic, we have to get out of the whole social media phenomena of blaming other people for not being Catholic and not considering how we are not Catholic. And I've written about this extensively at From Rome, that social media influencers have so many motives not to tell you the truth, even while they're telling you that they're Catholic. And AJ and I have criticized them all. Most of these in the English-speaking world are complete frauds, and they don't know what they're talking about. They're not even qualified. And when they are qualified, they're just deviously dishonest people. And I can't say in the English-speaking world I know of anyone who has a degree in theology or canon law who has spoken about the truth in these last 13 years about who is the Pope and who's not the Pope. I can't think I can name one. Some laymen have come to the truth and actually said it after a lot of their own research, even though it's beyond their personal training. And but most of them have just, like Taylor Marshall, he kept saying that Benedict was no longer the Pope, and he did a poll one day, I think a year after Benedict had passed away. He found out 60% of his audience held that Benedict was Pope until the death. And he was shocked that, because, Taylor Marshall has this idea that everyone respects everything he says, and the people who listen to him agree with him, but that wasn't the case on this. And thanks be to God that his followers are more Catholic than he is. Because if you're going to open your mouth about the faith, you better darn say the truth. Okay, you better darn say the truth, because God judges us for every idle word, which means he's going to punish us terribly if we lie about the Catholic faith or how to be Catholic. Now, this is the biggest problem. We don't have it so much in the English-speaking world, but it's very common in Italy and the Hispanic world. You're born a Catholic in a sense, because you're baptized. Everyone's baptized Catholic in most of those countries. And they presume that they're Catholic, and that's just not true. We have it a lot easier in the English-speaking world because we live in a hostile, non-Catholic environment. And we have to force ourselves to be Catholic. I mean, we have to do the personal study. We have to strive to live the faith. It's not like going into Walmart, all of a sudden you're inspired to act as a Catholic. There's no statue of Our Lady at the intersection. There's no mural of the Blessed Mother holding the child Jesus on the corner of the store. If you're not in a Catholic church or in a house of a Catholic who decorates his house with sacred images, there's nothing to say, I have to live the faith, or there's nothing to remind you. And this is one thing I love about Italy, and especially Malta and Spain, is when you're in those countries, there's Catholic images everywhere left by our ancestors, and you can't get away from it. And their churches are absolutely fascinating. Bill, you asked me a question. What do you say? What are your thoughts on sedevacantism and men like Bishop Donald Sanborn? Okay, that's a good question, because I hold that the conclave of 2013 and 2025 were invalid, and that Jorge Mary Bergoglio was not elected to be Pope in 2013 and was not Pope during the life of Benedict XVI. And I hold that Leo XIV is not Pope. So some people might think that I'm a sedevacantist, and I'm not. Okay. So for those who don't know, when a pope dies and there's no pope and they're about to elect a new one, during that period of time, there's a Latin phrase to discuss the legal state or condition that prevails when there is no pope, and it's called sede vacante, which is Latin meaning with the apostolic see vacant, meaning with the pope dead, no one being pope. Okay. Now, but when you see an ism added to it in English, then you're talking not about a historic fact, you're talking about an ideology. And not all individuals who even call themselves sedevacantists are sedevacantists, okay? Because I will use the word sedevacantism in the strict ideologic sense of a system of thought which presumes certain things are true without evidence in reality, and then lives according to that conjecture, and will not accept any fact or argument against that presupposition. That's true of any ideology. Well, it's Marxism, capitalism, sedevacantism. It's an ideology. And AJ and I over at Ordo Militaris Radio TV, we did a whole program on the dangers of ideology, and I highly recommend it to you. And AJ, if you stop by in the comments, share a link to that. So the sedevacantists, the ideologues, are going to hold that there was no pope after a certain date, and then they're going to have an argument of why that's the case, because they're not totally rational people. They do have arguments. and they do make claims. But if you examine the arguments and claims they make, you don't find the evidence necessary to conclude that their position is correct. For example, there's a famous sedevacantist in the United States called Gary Giuffre, and he even called me one day this spring, and I spent 5 hours talking to him. And he was absolutely dedicated to trying to convince me that the Conclave of 1958 was invalid and had no valid juridical result. So I said, what are your facts? And he went on and on about a person saying this and a person saying that, and hearsay of this, and second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand hearsay. He didn't have any documents. He didn't have any sworn testimonies. He didn't have anything. And I actually know the priest he used as a translator when he came to Italy years ago and tried to look for the evidence. And even that priest agrees there is no evidence. There's a lot of hearsay, but no evidence. So this is what distinguishes a sedevacantist from the position I'm advocating. I will give you objective facts that are indisputable in their reality. For example, in March of 2013, that conclave was invalid. Why? Because Benedict had not renounced the munus. And it says right at the beginning of the papal law, matter of fact, it says it in the oath that cardinals must take, that they're electing someone to receive the Petrae munus. So if the previous pope didn't renounce it, you can't elect someone else to receive it. And no one disputes that Benedict didn't renounce it. The document of his declaratio of 11th of February doesn't include the phrase, I renounce the munus. Okay. He renounced the ministry, not the munus. And no one disputes that in a conclave, you elect someone to receive the munus, because it's right in the papal law. In the oath, the cardinals take. And the papal law we're speaking about is Universi Dominici Gregis. And you can find it online at the Vatican in Latin and in maybe 5 other translations. But remember, only the Latin is the official text. And hello, Roger LeBlanc. Okay. I see you often commenting from Rome. And hello, Cough Mixture. A rare live appearance from your good self. Okay, hello. Yes, it is rare. Maybe I'll do them more in the future, because now YouTube claims they're not going to censor and I can say anything I like. And they're not suppressing things. Although I did a live stream in my Italian channel. It has 12,000 subscribers yesterday, and I only got 256 views. So I think YouTube suppressed it. Okay. This one might get more views because it's an English speaking world, but let's see how they suppress it. Because I'm not a YouTube producer. So if you're watching YouTube, let's say you're watching Candace Owens, she gets massive amounts of revenue when she gets 1 million views, because she has an account with YouTube and they pay her royalties for some of the advertising revenue she generates. But I do not have an account with YouTube, and they don't want to even have an account with me. And so any ad you might see during this live stream, they get all that money. I get nothing. And consequently, since I've asked that ads not be placed in my stream because I don't have that sharing program with them, they will not distribute this program as much as other people's programs. And that's why it's hard to see me on YouTube. And not even all my 7,500 viewers probably even got the notice for this video stream. So if you subscribe, please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel if you're not. And do share this video right now by sharing with your friends and get them to watch, because each of you who are diehard fans of From Rome, you probably have seen all my articles and you probably tried to talk to friends about them. But there's nothing better than get your friend in chat right now to ask the questions he has, because maybe he has questions or she has questions, or they have questions that you couldn't answer. I'm right here. You can get it right from the horse's mouth. And all of you, remember to like this video. Hey, there's 12 of you watching, but only 4 likes. So 8 of you need to do your duty. That helps spread this thing in the logarithms. And this live stream, I think, is going to be about 3 hours long. So you don't have to watch it all. You can watch it again tomorrow. But I'm here to talk to you as I go through. Philomena Lynn. Hi, brother. I'm debating on whether I should attend Mass on Sunday. It doesn't seem right if I go or not. Okay, so it's a precept of the church that you attend Mass on Sunday for us in the Roman Rite. This is a law of purely ecclesiastic right, which means it's not a divine law. I hope At least the church doesn't teach it is. I hold that going to Mass on Sunday is a divine institution because Christ rose from the dead on Sunday. And Christ is our high priest. And we should follow Jesus like his sheep. We should follow our shepherd wherever he goes. And if he rose from the dead on Sunday, he wants us to worship him and God the Father and the Holy Spirit on Sunday. This seems pretty obvious to me, but the actual historical working out of it is that it was the martyrs of the church in the first centuries who always went to the divine liturgy on Sunday. And the church then, centuries later, made it an obligation. I think they made it an obligation at the Lateran Council, I think, in 1215, although maybe it was made before. Because if you're not practicing your Christian faith every Sunday, you're going to pretty much lose it. But since it's of ecclesiastic right, according to church teaching, there's a lot of things that can intervene to absolve you of the obligation. Let's say you're a mother of a family and your littlest child is sick, and you have to be there to see that he or she is hydrated, gets the medicine, you clean their linens, the clothes, because anything could happen at any time. It's a serious condition. Well, your husband and the rest of your family can go to Mass. You are not obliged to go to Mass that day because you're taking care of someone sick in a home. Or let's say there's 3 feet of snow outside of your house and the city isn't plowing the streets. You're obviously not obliged to go to Mass. Or even if they are plowing the streets and you can't get someone to clean your driveway. Let's say you're an elderly person, you have a foot of snow in your driveway and your car is in your garage and you can't get 40 feet to the street. And if you try to shovel that yourself, you give yourself a heart attack. You're not obliged. Okay. You're not obliged even to pay someone to plow your driveway and $200 so you can get to church on Sunday, because that's an enormous amount of money. Okay. If the churches are all closed and you have to drive more than an hour to get to a church, you're not obliged. If you can't afford to pay the gasoline or don't even have a car and you can't get to church, you're not obliged. Because if it's further than an hour that you could walk or drive, you're not obliged. If the only church in your area is a priest who is a raving heretic, a schismatic, a sedevacantist, Greek Orthodox, you're not obliged to go to Mass. Okay. So many things that cancel that obligation out. However, we should go to attend Mass on Sunday, not so much as to be present at the liturgy, but to receive our Lord worthily in the most blessed sacrament, or if we can't, at least to worship him and ask him for the grace to be worthy one day to receive him. Because our life has to be our life with Christ. If we're trying to be Catholics and without living in the presence of Jesus Christ and following him every day, we're wasting our lives. That's the whole purpose of life. We're not made for this world, but for the world to come. And Christ is the gate to heaven, okay? Knowing Christ is the root of immortality, as it says in Scripture. And to know thee, Jesus Christ, is the essence of our religion. So if we're not doing that, we're wasting our time. Right now, a lot of people ask me, should I go to Mass because they're naming Leo the 14th? This is not an easy question to answer because it could be your priest is a coward or he's ignorant. That means he doesn't know the facts I'm going to expound during this live stream. And that's probably 99.999% of all the priests in the world. Or he knows that Leo the 14th can't be the Pope because he's a heretic or he was invalidly elected, but he doesn't have the courage to omit his name in the canon. So for both those kinds of priests, you can attend their Mass, you're not committing any sin. But if he is a Bergoglian heretic, I mean, he spoke in favor of fiducia supplicans, he spoke in favor of amoris laetitia, he's giving blessing to homosexuals, he's giving the sacraments to divorced and remarried, don't go to his Mass, even if it's the church is right next to your house, because you would be contributing to the scandal he's giving, and you should encourage even people not to attend that because that guy's not Catholic. So do you typically go to Mass at the same place yourself? Proclivity Life asks me. Yes, I do. And I know a priest at Rome who doesn't have the picture, Pope Francis or Pope Leo, in the sacristy. And he didn't have him when I first met him. So he's on the Catholic side. I can't say who it is. He'd be persecuted. And he never preaches any of the errors of Pope Francis or Leo. I think he's absolutely disgusted what's going on at the Vatican. And if you're a priest out there, or if you have a priest share this video and cite me at this moment in the live stream, because a lot of priests are just overly scrupulous that they have to mention Leo in the canon of the Mass. So I know some priests at Rome who used to say, in communion with Pope Benedict without any problem. But when it came to Pope Francis or Leo, they'd say in communion with Holy Father, Pope Francis, Pope Leo. They'd leave a silence there to show you that they didn't really want to say these words, but they're saying these words. Okay, so a priest like that is Catholic, maybe, but is not a perfectly heroic priest who would, a perfectly heroic priest right now would say, in communion with our bishop, and he would omit the whole mention of who's the Pope. Okay. But most of the clergy just heard what the news said and believed it and went with that, because they're so out of touch. You have to remember the clergy are focused on saving you. At least that's what they're supposed to be doing. So they have their life, they have their prayers they have to say, they have all their duties. They're running back and forth between weddings, marriages, burials, baptisms. They don't have time to read from Rome. They don't have time to watch the news every day. And they don't have time to analyze whether their own bishop's a heretic or whether the Pope was invalidly elected. They don't have time to that. So they don't know it. And a matter of fact, after Vatican II, most clergy know that the prudent thing to do is not to look into those questions. Because when you find the truth, you're going to be under a tremendous internal struggle to say that, to act on the truth or not act on it. So they try not to know about it. And that is a form of cowardice. But if you weren't that kind of guy, you wouldn't be ordained a priest. I'm not a priest, for example. And I thank God every day that I'm not a priest, because I've never had to be put into that catch-22. And the people tell me, oh, you should become a priest. And I would say, if I became a priest, I'd be excommunicated by the end of the week. Not because I'm not Catholic, but because of what I would say in my homily. I'd ask my bishop to be there at my first homily, and I would blast him with hellfire for going along with all kinds of errors that are currently what's happening in the church, because we are not living in the greatest, most illuminated, honest age of the church. We are living in the most corrupt, dark, and persecuted age of the church in the entire history, because we have an entire hierarchy that doesn't care who the Pope is, who's not the Pope. And we have cardinals who think they can do whatever they do. And the individuals who are willing to say that this is wrong and we shouldn't do it, like myself, are very rare. I'm probably the only one of a consecrated person who isn't excommunicated, who says these things. And they all know at Rome, people say, oh, brother, with all these controversies, why didn't you get executed? I'm not a member of the clergy. And because I have a really bad reputation at Rome, because during this scandemic, I filed criminal complaints against 28 police for violating my rights. And they were really under a big legal threat for years that made them sweat, because police in Italy don't get paid much. And I had a whole team of lawyers helping me. So the bishops of Italy and at the Vatican, they know, don't you fight me legally, because I got a lot of friends who are lawyers, and I can make your day really bad. So they don't ever even mention my name, because if they did, then the whole house of cards would fall down. Because you look at From Rome, or if you go to chiesaromana.info, you will see my arguments laid out. And they're, I wouldn't say they're impeccable arguments, but I'd say they're so strong, no one has refuted them. No one refuted any of my arguments against Benedict in all the years I was out, and they still haven't refuted them. They can't, because they're not doing the will of God, and I'm following the law. And if they were to mention me, and like, if someday you read Pope Leo XIV excommunicates Alexis Bugnolo for promoting disunity in the church and organizing another papal election in violation of canon law during the lifetime of another pope, you can burst out laughing, because the day they do that is the day I win. Because the day they do that, he'll make my name heard around the world, and everyone will come to From Rome or Case Romana Info, and they'll see my arguments, and then they'll realize that what's going on in the Vatican is a big charade. So I'm not afraid of an excommunication. I would welcome it. And but for example, Ann Barnard hasn't been excommunicated either, and no one wonders why she hasn't been excommunicated. And she uses a bit more colorful language in regard to Bergoglio and Prevost than I do. And as far as I know, she lives at Florence, Italy. At least that's the supposition I go under. And so they could, but it doesn't. And let's see. That was put. Let's see. Philomena Lynn says, I drove more than 2 hours during the pandemic to get to Mass. The local traditional Mass priests were ordained by Cardinal Burke. Okay. That if you go further, if you make sacrifices to go to Mass on Sunday, there are people in Nigeria and in Peru that walk 6 hours to get to Mass. You're going to get more blessings from that, certainly. Bill says, I have all the evidence on my channel, massive details from numerous different angles. That doesn't mean that I think you're wrong. Bill, I don't understand the context of what you're saying. You're talking about, so explain to me what you're talking about. Okay, so as Catholics, we should hold the hand of Jesus Christ and Our Lady. Okay, we should be like little children who want, first of all, to get to heaven and realize the rest doesn't matter. What I mean is all the pursuits of fame, glory, wealth, security. What matters to us is should be loving God and loving those around us and caring those whom we're obliged to care for or who God puts in our way. This should be our life. We hold Our Lady's hand by saying the Rosary daily. When you're saying the Rosary, you are holding the hand of Our Lady, and she's just letting a whole bunch of graces flood into you. And but to hold the hand of Jesus Christ, you have to want to do the will of God. And Christ being king, he first wants you to obey the laws of his kingdom, which are the laws of the Catholic Church. Okay, and in the Roman Rite, they're the code of canon law for the Roman Rite, and the papal laws on his vicar, because if you want to really offend a king, you pretend that someone who's not his vicar is his vicar, and you obey this fake vicar and not his vicar. That's like going to the gates of heaven and giving our Lord a foul hand sign, because you're joking with lightning. Okay, God can destroy you in an instant and send you to hell forever. You don't joke with the divine power. You don't play games with the divine power. Christ told us who the true Pope is when he says, whatsoever you bind on earth shall bound in heaven. And John Paul II laid down the law. And if you don't accept that law, if you think you can violate that law, you are playing with hellfire and heavenly lightning. And so this is not any small thing. And I pointed this out from Rome. If you read the bull of Nicholas II, In Nomine Domini, and if you type bull of Pope Nicholas II, In Nomine Domini, on any search engine, you're going to end up at a page that has a link to my translation, because I translated it into English and into Italian. And the whole last part of that bull is a long curse against anyone who would pretend to be Pope against the laws of the church. It's not a light thing at all. It is a nefarious and very devious evil sin. It is what the cardinals did during the conclave is a sin so evil that you can't compare it to any other sin. And none of us can be guilty of that kind of evil because we're not cardinal electors. But the cardinal electors, by what they did in May, have merited eternal damnation, and they will burn in hell for all eternity unless they repent. And the ones that don't repent of it, the ones that are dying now since the conclave without repenting of it, knowing what they did was false, they're going straight to hell. And that is Cardinal Burke to Cardinal Sarah, any of those cardinals. They are in now mortal sin. They are in the hands of Satan because they've done something they know is evil and wrong. And I'll explain it why it is. So let's get to the argument now. Why is the conclave invalid? And if you're a reader from Rome, you can even answer in the comments. And it's invalid because the papal law required that they do something that they didn't do. So to put this in context first, correct, Philomena. So to put this in context first, a papal election is valid if it follows the rules. But there can be different kinds of rules. There can be a rule that says use paper ballots, and there could be a rule there can only be so many voters. And these rules are all important. If we go back to 1058, Pope Stephen IX laid down an absurd, simple rule that has never been had in any other conclave. But for the election of his successor, he laid down this rule that the election can't take place until Saint Hildebrand, Archdeacon of the Church of Rome, returns from the imperial court of Germany to Rome to be present at the election. That means the election won't be valid unless Hildebrand is present. Now and no sooner was he dead as they elected someone, even while St. Hildebrand, the archdeacon, wasn't present. So when Hildebrand came back, he let them have it. I mean, he preached against him. He says, this election is totally valid. Benedict X, you're not the Pope. You need to get back to Albano. You're only Bishop of Albano. What you've done is evil. And with troops, they drove him out of the city. And he and Cardinal Hubert of Silva Candida, who was a Burgundian, and Cardinal St. Peter Damian, who, as you might know, is our hermit and the writer of the one who most condemned the corruption of the clergy of his age. They, with some nobles and some laity, religious and priests, went to Siena, which is like a 4-hour drive north of Rome, even today. So back then, it's like a week's travel, probably more than a week's travel from Rome. And there at Siena, I don't know where, if it was in the piazza or the cathedral or the town hall, they elected Guy of Burgundy, who was the Bishop of Florence. And they probably chose Guy because as Bishop of Florence, he was known to the imperial vicar, because the Germans held the Holy Roman Empire and they governed Italy through an imperial vicar, not in the sense of ecclesiastic. He was a civil governor, and he had his court at Florence. So he knew the Bishop of Florence, Guy of Burgundy, and so they elected Guy of Burgundy, and then Hildebrand went to the imperial court of Germany and got permission from the empress to recognize Guy as the Pope, and explained the irregularity in the election of March 1058 and why. And the law Stephen IX had determined, and how they broke the law, and how Benedict X was an anti-pope. And she agreed on the condition that her son, Henry IV, who was still in his minority, would receive the imperial crown once he reaches the age of 18. And St. Hildebrand was authorized by Pope Nicholas II to grant that. And St. Hildebrand returns to Siena. And then on December 6th, I think it was, or December 5th, 1058, Nicholas II, Guy of Burgundy, took the name Nicholas II, and that begins his pontificate. I think then in the presence of some German troops, they march down the road to Sutri, Italy, the same as the Council of Sutri, where they deposed 3 popes in 1046. And they held a provincial council, and they declared Benedict X usurper and antichrist and anti-pope. And then they marched to Rome, and the German troops took control of the city easily, because the troops of the Frangipani, who had put John Minucius, the Bishop of Albano, in power as Benedict X, they fled the city. And Benedict X was captured by the forces of Nicholas II and put in a prison. And he was punished by being reduced to the lay state. And he was given he was threatened with excommunication unless he renounced the papacy, which he did. Of course, he didn't have to, because he wasn't Pope. And then he was ordered not to return to Rome. And I think some months or some years later, he did return to Rome, and St. Hildebrand went wild. It's like, how dare you return to Rome? And he sent some papal troops, and they arrested him and put him in prison again. And Hildebrand wanted him excommunicated, but Nicholas II was a bit more, I'll restore you to the diaconate if you go into a monastery prison and stay there the rest of your life and just disappear. And that's what John Minucius did. And But you can see the saints. We have a doctor of the church, St. Peter Damian, and one of the greatest saints of the Gregorian form, Hildebrand, who goes on to become Pope Gregory VII, Saint Pope Gregory VII. They found it absolutely intolerable and outrageous that an election was held in violation of this crazy rule of Stephen IX that Hildebrand had to be present for the election. So how, if that's the way saints and doctors of the church, because Peter Damian is a doctor of the church, and almost at no time in history do you have at one papal election two canonized saints, Hildebrand, Gregory VII, and Peter Damian. If that's how they reacted, how should we react in 2025 when they tried to organize, they held a conclave with 133 electors? Now, when the rule of John Paul II, whom they claim is a saint and a pope and was the true vicar of Christ, they violated. So there's just no way this conclave can be valid. And Italians who don't know much about anything, but all the civil lawyers I know in Italy, they all agree this conclave is invalid. But I will explain now the argument for those who don't know. St. Gregory VII, while he was Pope, did die in exile. And I was at his church at Salerno to visit him and St. Matthew just 2 weeks ago. And I picked up a whole bunch of holy cards. He has a holy card at St. Hildebrand. Let's see if I can get it. And it has a little medallion inside the plastic and has a little prayer on the back. And I got 10 of these. And what else did I get when I visited his tomb? Oh yeah, I got a little book about the art in the Cathedral of St. Matthew. It's called the Cathedral of St. Matthew because the Apostle Matthew, St. Matthew, is buried at Salerno. And Salerno is about a 3.5 hour drive south of Rome. And it's a beautiful cathedral with a lot of art. And I took a lot of photos. I have the intention of doing some articles from Rome and publishing the photos I took, but I'm not yet up to that. How do you know that the cardinals are in mortal sin? Is that what you're talking about, the cardinals? Or are you talking about, who's the they, Angelica? And when you answer that, I'll answer your question. So the rule of John Paul II is in number 33 of Universi Dominici Gregis. There's the Latin phrase, maximus autem numeris cardinalem electorum ne excedat centi viginti, which translated in English is, let the maximum number of electors not exceed 120. And that's a precept, and therefore it's a law. Because in a papal constitution, Universi Dominici Gregis is a constitution, so it includes commands, descriptions, and explanations. And so in a papal law, if John Paul II has said, it would be a good thing to have no more than 120 cardinal electors, that's not a command, and it could be violated without making the conclave invalid. But that's not what John Paul II wrote in the law. He wrote, let the maximum number of electors not exceed 120. And if you go to the beginning of that papal law, there's a preface, and he says in his preface, I'm going to set the limit at 120 because it's a number sufficient to describe the universality of the church. So how do we understand this command in number 33? The word sufficient, okay? John Paul II uses, it's a sufficient number. So if I have a sufficient number of eggs to make the omelet, to make the cake according to this recipe, if you use another egg, it's not sufficient. I mean, it's not necessary. If this is sufficient, another additional egg is not necessary, okay? And when you have a direct command to do something, and you're doing something that is not necessary, and you're commanded not to do it, that's a violation of the law, okay? So, for example, when you go to the bank and you withdraw $500 from your bank account, you fill out a form and they give you $500. The form authorizes $500. If the teller gives you $600 or $450, she has she has committed a financial crime, at least in U.S. law, because she hasn't done what she's authorized to do. And this is the same old principles of law. So the cardinals, to get around this, came up with this absolutely absurd statement on April 30th. That is one of the most shameful things that the College of Cardinals has ever done in the history of its existence. And it comes into existence with the Bull of Nicholas II. They say, oh, well, we had a dispensation. So two things we have to understand: that if a law requires you to do something, you can, if you violate it, you're committing a crime, or you're acting in a way that canonically is not valid, unless you have what's called a dispensation from the obligation. Okay. So for example, before you're ordained a priest, before a man is ordained a priest, he's ordained a deacon. And that's the rule of the church. You can't be ordained a priest unless you're first ordained a deacon, unless you have a dispensation. And there's whole rules about that, whether your bishop can grant it and whether the apostolic see, because as soon as it's a question of not observing a law because a dispensation is granted, the apostolic see is very sensitive to that. There's a whole rule on who can grant dispensations and when they're valid and everything. But you could dispense from the obligation that a man be ordained a deacon and have him ordained directly a priest. Okay. But that has to be allowed in law. Okay. Otherwise, the problem is with the papal law in number 4, it forbids dispensations. Okay, so now you have a problem. You can't get dispensed from any. You can't go to the Pope and say, let's have a dispensation from number 22, 34, and 76 of the papal law for the election of your successor. And he writes out a dispensation and say, okay, now we have a dispensation. No, you can't use that because number 4 says you can't use dispensations. That means you'd have to go to the Pope and say, change the law. And that's called derogation. Pope Francis would have had to derogate number 4 that makes dispensations unusable. And if he derogates the law, he's changing the law. If he's changing the law, he has to publish it. It has to be in the Acta Apostolic Sedis, which is the official gazette of the Vatican for laws published by the Roman Pontiff. And he never did that. So this dispensation the cardinals claim cannot be used. This is why it's so absurd what the cardinals did. Evidently, they felt that they could get away with it, because as long as they all agree into the crime, then no one can, say otherwise. Well, that's not how law works. Exactly. Well, I won't even. The argument I'm going to move or propose, or the argument I do use to say that Leo the 14th isn't the Pope, is an argument a minimi. So I'm not going to make as part of my argument, I'm not going to use the building block of saying Pope Francis was never the Pope, or the cardinals weren't named by a true Pope, and therefore the conclave is invalid. That's another argument. I want to make an argument that convinces everyone in the church, and that's why I stick with the number of 133 electors, because that's whether you believe the Catholic faith or not, whether the cardinals were valid or not, whether Pope Francis was ever the Pope or not, whether the cardinals are Satanists or not, whether in communion with Christ or not, there's 133 of them, and that's illegal. Okay, so my argument is based on the smallest objective fact, which is indisputable. And if you're going to debate someone, that's the best way to debate them, because you're guaranteed to win. If you want to start the argument that it's not a valid conclave because the cardinals were elected by Pope Francis, and Pope Francis wasn't, the conclave of 2013 wasn't valid because Benedict was still the Pope, you can make that argument, and it's a valid argument. I would agree with that, but that's not the argument I move. That's not the argument I propose, because a lot of Catholics don't accept that Benedict's Annunciation was invalid. Okay, and I want to convince all Catholics, okay, of the truth. Okay, so that's why I use the Rule of 133. So in attempting to use this dispensation, which had no value, they conducted a conclave of 133. And that makes it invalid because in number 76 of the University of Vinci Graduates, it says, if you conduct this election in any other way than is established in this Constitution, the election is null and void, and the one elected receives no right. And it is not there is not necessary a declaration of this fact. And this is a very strong thing because in number 76 of the papal law, John Paul II gives every single Catholic priest, bishop, cardinal, layman, religious, each of us in this chat, in this live stream, and all the Catholics in the world. He even gives non-Catholics. He gives everyone the right to say the election's invalid if it violates these rules. So I'm not going to get into conspiracies about how the votes were cast. What did the Cardinals tell us? That they were going to vote in 133 in every session. Well, that's clearly invalid. And if you want to get the details of it, number 68 says that when the Cardinals vote, they're each given a paper ballot, and then the paper ballots are gathered together and they're counted. And there has to be as many ballots as there are cardinal electors. Otherwise, if there's one more or one less, you take all of them and you burn them, okay? So that's number 68. They didn't burn them, they counted them because they could only count 120. They can't count 133, okay? And that makes the conclave invalid. So Cardinal Prevost has no claim to the papacy. Cardinal Prevost is no more the Pope than Angelica, Calvet, Philomena Lynn, the real AMR, Bill Wierzbinski, or Proclivity Life. You are equally the Pope as this guy. This guy's not the Pope at all. Okay. I think I'm annoying some of the people in this apartment building by talking so loud at this hour of the day. I'll try that. And you can imagine what a saint like Saint Hildebrand, if he was at the Vatican today, he'd probably be punching these cardinals and kicking their butts. He would be, he'd call out the Swiss Guard to have them all arrested. So if we had honest people at the Vatican police and the Swiss Guard would have arrested all these cardinals for doing what they did. And we don't. So who is it that's going to say the truth? I can say the truth because I'm not a priest. I live as a hermit. I'm in private vows, not public vows, so I don't need anything from the local bishop. I don't need anything from the local clergy. If they want to persecute me, fine. I'm not going to change what I'm saying. But someone has to say the truth. And that's what From Rome has been doing. And that's what most of you who share my articles have been doing. So Angelica Calvet, you haven't answered my question. So I assume if you're talking about the cardinals, when I say if you commit an objective crime at this level, that you're in mortal sin, I'm speaking objectively. Is it possible that some cardinals are so ignorant they don't know that they did something wrong? Perhaps in May 8th that was possible, but it's not possible in October 12th. Why? Because the readers of From Rome sent more than 150 cardinals a letter explaining that the conclave was invalid and why it's invalid. And you don't need a degree in canon law to understand this, but I think like third or half of the cardinals have degrees in canon law, so they understand this. And Cardinal Burke received one of these letters. Now, if these men were not in mortal sin, they would have goodwill. And if they had goodwill and they found out the election was invalid, they would say, we did something wrong and we need to do it over. Have they said that? No. The only other possibility is they think the argument the argument about the 133 cardinals isn't a good argument. And they would come out in public and say, our statement of April 30th seems to be misunderstood. And therefore, we as the College of Cardinals are going to make a public statement about it and explain. There's certain arguments claiming blah, 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 and they're wrong for the following reasons. Have they done that? No. So they're definitely in mortal sin because they shouldn't lie to the faithful. And if the faithful believe the Pope is not the Pope, they should give the faithful the reasons why the Pope is the Pope and not the Pope. Because they're shepherds. They're not just functionaries, they're bishops. They have the care of souls. They should not want to scandalize anyone, and they should want to remove scandal. For example, occasionally I'll misspeak during a video because I'm getting old, and I'll say one thing rather than another. As soon as I know, I'll correct it. Okay. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't be honest. And this is not even a question of saving your souls if I misspeak during a video. But if you're a bishop and a cardinal and you're not going to correct yourself at this level, there's no possible way you're in the state of grace. It's just not possible. That's not how the Christian religion works, because lying is a sin. Deceit is a sin. And claiming someone is the Pope who's not the Pope is the most worst. That's the worst sin you can commit as a cardinal. The worst sin. And how do we know this? Are there any canonized saints who were cardinals who supported an anti-pope? You'll find that no, there wasn't. There are no canonized saints who ever supported cardinals who supported an anti-pope. It's true that Saint Vincent Ferrer and Saint Colette, during their life, thought the anti-pope was the true pope and therefore supported him. I don't know if Saint Colette found out who was the true pope before she died, but Saint Vincent Ferrer found out, and he switched sides. So you can't even say there's a canonized saint who supported an anti-pope knowingly. But if we could have a vision of hell, you would see that all the supporters of anti-popes who knew that the man they supported wasn't the true pope, they're in hell now and never repented of it. They're in hell without a doubt. St. Catherine of Siena knew who was the true pope. And Catherine of Siena would have written letters, and even St. Vincent Ferrer was so ashamed when he found out that he had been supporting the wrong pope for most of his life that he didn't return to Aragon, which was his homeland. He died in exile in France because he couldn't face all the people in the presence of whom he worked miracles, saying that the Pope at Avignon was the true Pope when he wasn't the true Pope. And St. Vincent Ferrer was a very, very great saint. He worked almost any kind of miracles. But where is the devotion of St. Vincent Ferrer today? Almost everyone forgets St. Vincent Ferrer. I mean, hardly hear even Dominicans speaking of him, though he's a Dominican. And his relics are like forgotten. I know a little town in Sicily that has his arm, for example, and no one pays it any attention. And that's not because he wasn't a saint, because the Holy Spirit is even upset. He's a saint in heaven, but he isn't such a glorious saint as like St. Francis or, St. Catherine of Siena, who the Holy Spirit is constantly inspiring people to follow and imitate, because they were 100% right. They did the right thing. And they didn't take it on hearsay who the Pope was. Like Vincent Ferrer took on hearsay who was the Pope for like 30 years of his life, even though he was raising people from the dead and working all kinds of miracles. So he was canonically negligent in his due duty to determine who is the true Pope. Okay. He believed too much one of his friends, who was a cardinal, was a lying, cheating, sniveling, dishonest man. And because he was such a simple man, he didn't want to judge his friend. He assumed his friend was telling the truth. His friend was lying to him. Even fear of martyrdom is not a good reason to remain silent. Correct, Philomena. Though in certain cases on things that aren't so important, we can remain silent. For example, if the Nazis knocked on your door and say, are there any Jews in your basement? You can remain silent even if there are Jews in your basement. And you're not obliged to lie, or you're not obliged even to tell the truth. And you can use a mental reservation. But in the matter who's the true Pope, if you know he's invalidly elected and you say he's validly elected. So if you're a priest and you know that Leo XIV is not the Pope and you mention him as Pope in the canon, you're playing with hellfire. You are lying before the face of God, who is consecrated and he's on the altar in front of you. You are lying in the face of God against his own rule that whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. I'd advise you to stop it as soon as possible, because every time you say Leo XIV, knowing he's not the Pope, you're swallowing hellfire, okay? And no saint will come to your help. And as a matter of fact, there have been like 44, 48 anti-popes in history. And how do we know they're anti-popes? Because priests said one day, I'm not going to mention him in the canon, he's illegally elected. And everyone said, and the Catholics went, yay, you know? So there's no one who can tell you who is the true pope. Your bishop cannot order you to accept a man who's illegally elected as the pope. What makes a man the pope? He's elected according to the rules. And if the objective historic facts are that the rules were not followed, no one in heaven and earth could order you to accept him as the true pope. There's this crazy, really deviously evil, lying thesis out there. It says, well, if everyone has accepted the guy as the pope, he becomes the true pope, you know. That's like saying, we all know the mafia robbed the car dealership and stole all those cars. But whenever we see one of those cars, we're not going to say it's stolen because everyone in town agrees that it's okay for the mafia to do that. You know, because they have guns and they could gun me down in my house, you know. So you cannot, there's really nothing anyone could do to you for you saying who the true pope is. And I'll address myself to clergy. You can't be excommunicated. You can't be reduced to the state of priesthood. You can't be kicked out of the Catholic Church for saying Leo's not the pope. Even if your bishop does it, it's invalid. So, you know, brush it right off. If I was a priest and I said Leo the 14th is not the pope, and I started just saying, you know, during Mass, not mentioning his name and saying my homilies that we're in a sede vacante because Leo the 14th is not validly elected, and my bishop called me up and said, stop, I'm going to excommunicate you, I'd say, fly a kite, Your Excellency, because your excommunication will be rubber. It's going to bounce right off me because it's invalid. You can't excommunicate me for saying the truth. I don't care what you say, you know. And the bishop, I'd say, well, I'm going to remove you from the past, from being pastor, and say, well, you know, I'll appeal it all the way to Rome and I'll sue your butt off. You know, you got to stand up for what's right. Okay. And if you're not willing to do that, how can you be saving souls? You know, you can't save souls through compromise on questions like this. And but most priests don't have any other income. They have no other place to live. They have no one to take care of them. They don't know how to beg, and maybe they're too ashamed to beg. So I'm a Franciscan, at least. I've been begging for everything I have since '91 when I became a Franciscan. So for me to beg, you know, I don't, you know, if I didn't even have my supporter from of you, my readers from Rome, I'd just go to the supermarket, stand outside the front door, and I'd say, you know, can you give me something to eat? And I've done that before. So as part of my vocation as a Franciscan, so it doesn't faze me that I have to beg because I've been begging so long. But for most priests, they don't know who's begging. So who is the Pope? Joe Paul. Currently, we don't have a Pope because the Conclave of 2025 in May had no valid juridical result because it was conducted with 133 electors. So in May, in the very same hour, the news came out that Prevost was elected. I said, this guy's not the Pope. And I explained why he's not the Pope. And an Italian YouTube channel and the Italian newspaper Oggi published the news. So from the very moment his name was mentioned, Catholics didn't accept this guy as the Pope. And over 100,000 heard the news. Probably 1 million heard the news in Italy that he's not the Pope. Then the cardinals are all written, and they were told to repent of what you did. Prevost was told, you got to resign. They have the letters. They didn't listen. 90 days passed. I wrote 5,000 letters to all the clergy of the Diocese of Rome. And I said, you know, this election's invalid. This is why it's invalid. And you should rebuke them for what they did. And if they don't repent in 90 days, you should proceed to the election of a Catholic Pope because you have the right according to Pope Nicholas II. But if you don't do that, then I'm going to convene an election because this is intolerable. We should not tolerate it. And no priest disagreed with me. There were some priests who didn't want to receive any more emails. I did receive an email from someone at the computer at the Pontifical Council for Life, and he says, don't send me any more of these ravings. But he didn't say it was wrong, and he didn't give me an argument, and he wouldn't even write his own name. So now, by November 8th, we'll be at 180 days after the illegal election. So obviously, I've written all the clergy at Rome and the suburban diocese, and explained that we can now elect the Pope, and I explained how they can go about voting, because they can vote either by coming in person to the election, or they can vote by delegating someone to represent them. And for those who are terrified of being persecuted, I said, you could even delegate me and I'll vote for whoever gets the most votes. So the election process has already begun. And that's what we Catholics are doing at Rome. And I've been living at Rome since 2019. So I have my ecclesiastic residence at Rome. And so I'm a member of the Roman Church, and so I inherited it by blood. And this is why, if you say Leo the 14th is not the Pope because of the election of 133 electors, you're not a sedevacantist, even if before the fact you said you were a sedevacantist. So all you sedes out there who say there hasn't been Pope since Pius the 12th, you don't have to say that anymore. You can say Leo the 14th is not the Pope because of 133 electors. And then you're no longer sedevacantist, you return to the Catholic position. Because we shouldn't say an election is invalid because we make up some facts of history, some suspicions, some plots of conspiracy, and there's no facts to prove it. It's also very absurd and silly to claim you're going to take such an important position on the basis of things that aren't factually provable. Now, the live feed is going to go for 3 hours. We're only at 1 hour and 12 minutes. So I'm not, with the real AMR, I'm not in favor of praying in live feeds because you don't actually see me. And you're not actually in my presence. You see an electronic reproduction of my face, and you hear an electronic reproduction of my voice. And actually, I'm not even certain that with the existence of AI right now, that you're actually hearing what I'm saying, and AI is not changing what I'm saying. I assume you do hear what I'm saying. But pretty soon, we won't even have that certainty. So if you're going to pray with someone, you have to be in the presence of that person, okay? But, say your rosary every day, say whatever your prayers, and if you want, it could be late at night, turn off this live stream and pray, and I'll pray with you in spirit. Because we're in different time zones, we don't all talk and pray and eat at the same time. Now, if you pause me for a moment, I will get something to drink because my throat is drying out. Now, regarding the Cardinals' claim, there's a lot of dishonesty in it because in their communication of April 30th, where they claim that they got a dispensation of Pope Francis, they say we reveal the fact that Pope Francis gave us a dispensation. As soon as they use the word reveal, you know they're crooks, because a dispensation from observance of a papal law should be in a document. It should be testified to by 2 witnesses, and it should have been published when it was granted. In law, there's no such thing as secret documents, secret dispensations. It doesn't work that way. So when they say reveal, they all know they're lying. And if Pope Francis granted such a dispensation, they should cite the day he granted it, the hour, the place he was, and who are the witnesses that heard him say it if he said it. And they should have signed a sworn oath that this thing did occur at that time and that place with those witnesses. If we are to grant that a dispensation could be granted verbally. as far as I know, dispensations cannot be granted verbally. They have to be put in writing. So they don't do that. The cardinals don't even say when this dispensation was granted, how it was granted, who was present, who heard him, and with what words was it granted. They don't say any of that. They say we reveal. Well, it's pretty darn convenient now that Pope Francis has been dead 19 days, 9 days. You're claiming you're revealing something. It doesn't work that way. And no legal system that works that way. Can you imagine if Donald Trump, after leaving office, 11 days after he's left from office, someone said, I have a presidential pardon. I'm revealing now that he gave it to me. And so, here, and he didn't put it in writing. I mean, there are no witnesses, but I have a pardon. You see how long a claim like that would last. I have asked everyone to pray for the election of the Pope, and I do appreciate if you are doing that. So for even their claim to have a dispensation is completely null and void. And if you look at Universi Dominici Gradius, paragraph 1, it says the cardinals can't have no authority over what the Pope did. It's not like the Pope dies and the cardinals now have the papal authority and they can do what they want. It doesn't work that way. And that's forbidden in number 1 of Universi Dominici Gradius. And the cardinals did not use their authority in number 5 to interpret dubious or controversial passages. They admit in their statement of April 30th that it's absolutely clear that you can't have more than 120. Okay. And so they told a half-truth. They could use a dispensation if they were granted one, which they weren't. It's obvious that they're lying. But then they could only use it if there was a derogation of UDG number 4, paragraph 4 of the papal law, that says you can't use dispensations. So to hold that the cardinals are not in mortal sin for what they did, I think that would be a rash statement, because that's like saying, well, he walked into the bank, he pulled out a gun, they gave him a big bag of money, and he ran out and got in the car and fled. In such a case, if I say that guy committed the mortal sin of theft, and you say to me, we shouldn't judge him, we don't know if he knows what he did is wrong. No, it doesn't work that way. The cardinals know they're lying. The ones with doctorates in canon law know they're crooks, and they did something. So why did they do all this? We don't know, but I assume it's because they were being paid to vote. Because why would you risk so much? Why would you risk an invalid election? Why would you risk going to hell? Why would you risk even being caught doing that? Unless there's some reason you're obsessed with voting. And I heard that here at Rome it said that Prevost got sufficient number of votes on the 3rd vote. They didn't have to go to the 4th vote. But he said, let's go to a 4th vote and vote one more time, which isn't even according to the rules. And that's probably because they were being paid for every vote they got, because a week before the conclave, a whole bunch of wealthy people came to Rome and offered the Vatican $1 billion. We don't know under what conditions. And after the conclave, no one's talking about this $1 billion. There should be someone at the Vatican saying, we received the following grants from these donors, to help for papal liturgies, to repair this basilica, to run our charity programs. Where did that money come from and where did it go to? Total silence. So that money went somewhere. $1 billion just doesn't disappear. You don't pledge $1 billion and then where did you pledge it to? How did that money go to? So that's my theory, but I'm not going to base my argument on the idea that they were bribed, okay? Because actually in the papal law, if a cardinal was bribed with money, it doesn't make the election invalid. Okay. And I personally don't like that aspect of the law. I'm of the opinion that that a Roman pontiff who allows simony to not invalidate an election, a papal election, probably went to hell. Because that should not be tolerated, not at all. even if it's difficult to prove, there should be something in the papal law saying, if after the election any accusation of bribery comes to fore, a tribunal, chosen, for example, by the presidents of the Episcopal conferences of the world, will hear the charge, and the cardinals who took the money will be excommunicated and reduced to the lay state. It should at least say that for simony. And if a pope won his election by simony, he should admit it and resign. So yeah, just to comment again on real MAR, a lot of laymen do YouTube videos, and they'll begin with a prayer and end with a prayer. Even Candace Owens, she has a crucifix behind her. I don't do that because that's grifting on religion. A YouTube video is not a religious act. It's just an act of conversation. And I'm not going to instrumentalize my YouTube channel as if I am some kind of priest in a church. I think that's very wrong. I think it's sacrilegious. A bishop can do it and a priest can do it, but people who aren't bishops and priests shouldn't do that, and because not everything I say represents my religion. If I'm going to put a crucifix behind me in a YouTube video, I better solely speak about the Catholic faith and only explain according to the teaching of the Doctors, Fathers, and the Church herself. I shouldn't be talking about anything else, politics, weather. I shouldn't, because there's a crucifix behind me, and you can see I haven't even lined up my video with this painting of these two saints who are meeting, because this is just me talking to you. I am not trying to usurp the authority of a priest, and I'm telling you that I'm not even an authority for what I say. I don't have a degree in canon law, but I just follow the laws as they're written. And we shouldn't use even the symbols of our religion to promote ourselves. Christ condemned that a lot when he talked about people who read long prayers on corners wearing long tassels and stuff. No one ever thought he was speaking about YouTubers, but he's definitely speaking about YouTubers. You have some laymen that have more stuff behind them than you find in most churches. And they're using religion to decorate their screen, to somehow add to what they say. And a lot of them don't have any degrees in theology, like Kennedy Hall or Michael Matt or Eric Sammons. One of the few ones who has a degree in canon law, I think, is Steve O'Reilly, but he can't get anything right because he worked for the CIA and still gets a pension check from them. And so he's paid to lie and trained to lie. Ann Barnhart, but she doesn't do videos, I don't think. There's just so many people that grift off the Catholic faith. It's absurd. And that's why when I would do a video, you're not hearing me, buy my book, buy my t-shirts, click a button here and pay me, support me. I don't do that. I think that's ridiculous. Even though I am, as a Franciscan, you'd say I'm a professional beggar. I'll beg at the supermarket. I'm not going to, so that's why I don't do that. And you shouldn't. I think that is an abuse. But you have to understand that social media can be used to control you and to brainwash you. There are a lot of cult leaders on social media that constantly do videos and tell people what to think, and they have to watch another one and another one. And you see that I don't do that. I haven't used this channel for like 3 years. And I'm not going to say the same thing 27 times. I'll do a video once on the topic because I assume you're a human being and not a dog that needs to be trained 27 times to say the same thing. But you'll see that other people don't do that. They'll do, I watch Candace Owens, for example, and I appreciate what you said, but you'll see with these YouTubers, they'll take an excerpt out of a video they made and then they'll launch it as a short. And, you'll get 5 shorts from one long indirect from what they said something, and you'll see that I don't do that. I don't even have the technical ability to do that. I don't have the equipment. I don't have a sound studio. I'm just using a laptop to talk to you. And I think that's, Some people live that way, that's how they get their income. Okay, fine by them, but I'm not going to do that. It's not what I'm here for. I'm not a YouTuber, and I find YouTube actually revolting and disgusting, and that people are going to, because so many people on YouTube would say, you got to watch this video because this is going to be the ultimate last truth, and the world's going to end afterwards. And if you don't hear what I have to say, you're going to hell. That's MK Ultra level psychological manipulation. That's why I prefer a kind of just thing. Bella Rock, it is good to have a crucifix in every part of your house. Matter of fact, if I showed you the rest of the room I'm in, you will see that I have more religious images than there's spaces to mount them. Okay, because I'm a monk, and I like, as soon as I open my eyes in the morning, to see the saints. And this is actually the blankest wall in the that I have, and I could show you dozens of images I have, but that's not what this video is about. So if you ask me questions about the conclave, so what are we doing? So all the clergy were informed, and they didn't act, and now I wrote all the clergy again. And now it's a matter of the Catholics who are still Catholic at Rome and who have the courage to act, to come together and vote. But the biggest problem is a candidate. We need to find a bishop, and we need to convince the bishops. So you might know, if you follow from Rome, that I spent a whole week in Poland trying to track down Lenga. I couldn't find him. He's gone off the grid. And I asked his friends to help me, and they didn't seem even interested in helping. And I couldn't make out whether his friends are pro-Russian or Freemasons, or I don't know what, or if Lenga's health is good enough to be Pope, or, whether he has any interest in. I think he would be one of the better candidates. But, a candidate has to be at least willing to be found. And it cost me €2,000 that trip trying to find him. And I don't speak a word of Polish, so I had to hire a professional translator, and we called everyone. And I did get some information, but I didn't get enough to contact him. And he has my letter, so he can contact me anytime he likes. And so if any of you are Poles and you're listening from Poland, Lenga has my email. He even, I think, has my phone number. So please contact me, Your Excellency. But I generally think that perhaps he's pro-Russian. He doesn't like I helped Ukrainians, and that he has no interest in saving the church. I hope I'm wrong. Because this is part of the problem. It's not just the cardinals violating the papal law. It's the fact that the bishops of the whole world don't seem to care. And if you're a bishop, retired or not, and you don't care who the Pope is, you're going to go to hell, because you're disrespecting Jesus Christ. Those of you listening to me, those of you who read from Rome, and I myself, we don't have any obligation, strictly speaking, to save the church. I didn't have to come to Rome. Do I have to come to Rome? 6 years ago, become a member of the church and advocate for the laws be observed. Is that my duty? God can answer that question. But for you who aren't members of the Roman Church, is it your duty? No. So we're doing something way above our duty. But it is the duty of a bishop to know who the Pope is and to make sure that he doesn't recognize a fake Pope. That is the duty of the bishop. Even if you were appointed by the fake Pope, it's your duty to find out whether he's the fake Pope or not. And if you were a priest and you're named a bishop, and you become the bishop of the diocese, and then you find out 3 years later that you became a bishop of diocese because 3 friends of yours bribed a cardinal in Rome to nominate you to the Pope as the bishop, you should resign, because that's just dishonest. These are important questions for bishops, much more important than for us. Yeah, I think Candace has goodwill, and she's still learning. And if you are in communication with Candace Owens, you can share this video with her, because I already shared with Candace Owens the information about the Save Rome project. So I think she knows something about it, because a few days later she says, we live in an age where all our leaders are fake and false. So I think she did read it. And hopefully one day she'll speak about it, because if she speaks about it, she'll break the truth, and, it will become widely spoken of. Because what Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are doing in the American political scene, openly speaking about Christian faith and openly speaking about the corruption of the U.S. government, we Catholics should be doing in the Catholic Church about the problems in the church. Now, I don't have the personality of Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens. I'm a religious, so I have a different approach to these things. I don't approach it like a layman does. And you'll see that from the way I talk about things. I talk about issues, problems. I don't do any kind of publicity, okay? Anything that's really on hot topic kind of stuff. And we don't have this in the Catholic Church. We have people who are always worried whether they're going to be invited to the next cocktail party. And from Michael Matt to Eric Sammons to Peter Skojak to Taylor Marshall, Edward Penton, Diana Montagna, Brio Dale. I could go on and on, name these people. Kennedy Hall. If I forgot anyone, mention it, and I'll mention them. And that's not how Catholic independent media should act. They should say the truth. But if you're going to look at person's personal integrity, I think Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson have more personal integrity in their pinky when it comes to speaking the truth than nearly every Catholic YouTuber out there. Okay, because they're not willing to openly speak about the problems of the church. And part of the problem is because the clergy can't do that, they'd be immediately punished, and that religious orders wouldn't get permission from their superior. But lay people can certainly do that. But most lay people don't have the preparation and the formation to speak about it. I mean, Tucker Carlson can talk about politics because he's been a journalist his whole life. And even Candace has been politically involved her whole life. They're like experts in that, so they can talk about it. And they have proven track records, and we're in big influential organizations. We don't have laymen like that in the Catholic Church, because we don't have those kinds of institutions in the church where a layman would become popular from being a member, unless they're an ex-priest or, an ex-religious or something like that. What do you think of Eric Jaweski? Well, I don't answer questions, what do you think of? Because I don't think a person is an object of thought. But if you want to, what I know of Eric Jaweski is very, very little. And I have heard that he's kind of like a cult leader. He's known to be very, people have complained online that he's very solicitous of individuals to financially support him. And some people say he's going over the boundaries of ethics on that. He's been out there, I think, since 2016 or something like that, but I don't think he's acting like a knight or as a Catholic, and I think he's from Texas, if I think. But he's just a layman, and he often cites what I publish it from Rome. For what reason, I don't know. And his organization, I don't know what it does other than financially support him. So that's all I really know about him. He's never written me, and I have no interest in what his organization, because I'm like a really traditional Catholic in the sense of I don't think laymen should be running the church. I don't think laymen should be running pious associations. I think that's the work for clergy and religious, and they're the ones that are qualified and should do it. So when I hear that a bunch of Catholic writers are getting together and founding a Pelican Plus, that new initiative of some authors, I kind of laugh, because you say, the church isn't supposed to be run by laymen, and laymen should be telling us what to believe, especially converts. Like Eric Sammons is a convert, and he'll often tell Catholics what to believe. I'm a cradle Catholic. I burst out laughing when I hear these laymen start telling you what you should believe and what you think, and they're not quoting a document of the church. They're giving you their opinion. this is how the Reformation began, and this is why all these grifters on social media are 100% behind Vatican II, because they want laymen running the church. This new neo-trad group led by Chris Jackson, they're a bunch of, we don't want clergy, we want to run the church, we laymen. They're a bunch of Protestants. Don't listen to people like that, and a lot of sedes are that problem too. So someone asked me what I think of, what do I think of Sanborn? I don't think of people, but Sanborn is involved in trying to be Catholic without being in communion with the Pope. And if sedevacantists weren't ideologues, they actually wanted the restoration of the Catholic faith, then they should be ringing my phone 24/7 saying, finally, there's going to be election of a Catholic Pope. What can I do to help? How many of these people called me? Gary Giuffre called me. And in the 5 hours I spoke to him, he let me speak for about 30 minutes. And the other 4.5 hours, he tried to convince me that the election of 1958 was invalid, although he had no proof for it. And if I didn't accept that the election of 58 was valid, then, there's no point talking about the election of a Catholic Pope in 2025. I mean, Gary, I appreciate your phone call if you listen to this video, but I think you're, slightly off. I'll say it frankly to you. Because if a person like Bishop Sanborn was on, or any of the bishops of the Society of St. Pius X, or any of the bishops consecrated by who was the British bishop of the Society of Pius X, I forget his name, or any of the bishops consecrated by him, they would be ringing my phone off the wall and say, okay, what can we do to help to elect the Catholic Pope? Because this year we can elect a Catholic Pope who's going to restore the Tridentine Mass and undo the Vatican Council. He could do all those things. Have these people helped me one bit? Not one bit. So then you can ask yourself, did they have goodwill? Are they just schismatics pretending to be Catholics and then saying a certain conclave was invalid and, therefore I have freedom to do what I want? Or do they actually want to restore the Catholic faith? I think I'm the only one who can say that I've come to Rome to defend the church and I want the papacy restored. Of course, all of you who helped me in this work, you can say that too. But I don't think there's a sedevacanist on earth who's done even a grain in comparison to the mountain I've done of work for the papacy, because they don't come to Rome. They're not trying to restore the papacy. They just want their own little islands. They have their own masses and stuff. And they keep up the appearances of Christianity, but they're like Anglicans. They're like high church Anglicans. They have this. They keep up the appearances of Catholicism, but they're not in communion with Rome, and they have no intention of ever coming back in communion with Rome. Because they're ideologues. As far as they're willing to say Rome is lost. They're like Greek Orthodox. Okay, maybe it's best I compare them to the Greek Orthodox because they have valid sacraments. So, but Daniel Sanborn, I don't know anything of him. I've heard a video where he says you can bless things at a distance through a YouTube channel. That's just not true. The Catholic teaching is the voice of the priest who's giving the blessing must echo in the same air that touches the thing blessed. Otherwise, the blessing doesn't take place. That's the old standard rule. And, if a priest is blessing holy water, the container must be open. I laugh because there's priests here in Italy that get together 100 bottles of water that are closed and sealed and have never been opened, and then they bless them and think they have blessed holy water. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Okay. That's why when a child is baptized, he's blessed on his skin. If the priest was only going to bless the child on his clothing, the child wouldn't have gotten blessed. If instead of pouring the water over the skin of the baby, the priest pours the water over the clothing of the baby, it's not a valid baptism. Okay. You can't bless the container. You got to bless the contents. And the contents have to be in contact with the touch of the priest and the voice of the priest. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Tucker Carlson, I appreciate very much, but he says some things about Protestantism were just not wrong. So this is what the Catholics are doing at Rome. And you should ask yourself, you should be red hot mad. You should be irate. you should be insufferably angry with all these other, with Michael Matt, Eric Sammons, Kennedy Hall, Taylor Marshall, Edward Penton, Diana Montagna, Brio Dale, all these people who give you Catholic news, who claim to be independents, EWTN, The Pillar, that no one's talking about the invalidity of the conclave. This is what you should be angry about. And some of you are very upset about it and have tried to talk to these people and they won't. But if they don't care who the Pope is, they're not Catholic, okay? They're just faking it. And in this, laymen are even more guilty than clergy, because at least the priest is being threatened. The priest can say, I'm being threatened by my bishop. I could lose my livelihood. But a layman who has a job, who does some videos on YouTube, he's not going to lose his job, and no one can threaten him from doing a video saying the conclave is invalid. So in a sense, the laymen who won't say the truth are more guilty than the clergy who won't say the truth. And I'm totally shocked by that, because I grew up thinking all Catholics, are faithful Catholics and good Catholics, and all Catholics have the courage. I mean, but if you have nothing to lose, why won't you say the truth? You must really hate the truth, If I think certain football, I'm not a football fan, but if I think the football team of down there in Texas is a lousy team, I'm not going to say, I'm not going to talk about it because, someone might persecute me. Oh boy. And the only journalist who honestly interviewed me about this was Dr. Jane Ruby back in May. We did a program, or was it in June? And where I talked about the conclave was invalid and Prevost is a heretic. She's not a Catholic herself, but she was willing to let me say the truth. And that's more than almost any other channel, I think I had plenty of readers contact people like Tucker Carlson, even Candace Owens, saying, get Brother Bugnolo on so you find out what's really going on. So we're living in an age where people are shamefully silent, in the most gentle way I can say it. You should never be afraid of being ostracized, because the kind of people who would ostracize you for telling the truth are not worth having as friends, okay? Not in the least, That's like saying, I'm not going to go to the local bar and say 2 + 2 is 4 because they won't talk to me anymore. If that's your problem, go to another bar, okay? Because people who will get upset with you for saying the truth are the most scurrilous, vile, and dishonest people. They're not worth having as friends, not even as friends. Now, I can count myself blessed that I've grown up in a family where everyone says the truth. I don't have the personal problem of having someone in the family that lives a lie. And so it's easier for me to say this. Some of you might live in families where some members of the family are just live 24 lies 24/7 a day. And so you're conditioned not to say the truth just to avoid conflict, But that's why having a vocation to be a hermit like I do is truly a blessed thing, because you've already made the decision to live for God and give up. I told Jesus Christ that I'm going to follow you. I don't care if I lose all my friends. I did that back when I was a freshman in high school. And I never regretted that decision. And I did that because I had a professor in English in high school who said, what is your most important thing in your life? List it. And then he said, who said the most important thing in their life is God? And no one raised their hand, not even me. And then he said to me, what did you write down as the most important thing in life? And I said, friends. He says, did you put God on your list? I said, I put God second. And he said to me, why did you put God second? And that English teacher taught me more about religion than any priest, because I felt so ashamed. I said, he's right. I'm going to put God first. we got to put God first and not be afraid of being ostracized. Yeah, proclivity to life. I'm willing to debate Michael Matt, Eric Sammons, Taylor Marshall, Kennedy Hall, Edward Penton, Diana Montagna, Brio Dale, you name them. I'm willing to debate them. And a lot of my followers are actually go on their YouTube channel saying, Brother Bugnolo is willing to debate anyone. They won't even have me on, because I'm not part of the club. Okay. You would have to have the integrity of a Tucker Carlson and be a Catholic to want me on your show. And I won't be surprised that it wouldn't. I don't think I'll ever be on Tucker Carlson, but I wouldn't be surprised that I'll be on Tucker Carlson long before I ever be on Michael Matt's channel at the Remnant, because it's a question of integrity. And hey, if Michael Matt wanted to come on my channel and do a debate, I'd welcome him right away, even though I disagree with him on so many things. Even Daniel Sanborn, I would be willing to do a video with Daniel Sanborn. Hey, I'd be willing to do a video with a Greek Orthodox priest, because I've always held that it's good to discuss things. And I'm a very good debater. I was on the debate team at my college. I have I was on a trivia, not really a debate team. It was more like a trivia thing. I have no fear of talking to people, even who disagree with me. And I can see what their positions are and, kind of dig into that to find out on what we agree and what we don't agree. And I have no shame exposing the presumptions of my interlocutor on whether they're true or not, I probably wouldn't debate a Muslim if he's in the same room with me, because he might have a knife. But other than that, Benedicar says, I only have 37. Hello, Benedicar. Yeah. I only have 37 subs on my Catholic channel, but I do have a channel that is political and I rosary recitations occasionally. Only 1,050 subs. I wanted you on in May, but I was afraid I'm too small. No, Benedicar, I'll come on your channel. You want to do, if you have the technology to do a live interview, I'd love to do it. Come to fromrome.info, leave a comment on one of the current posts, and in that comment, use your true email address and your true contact information, maybe your WhatsApp number, and we can make it happen. And yeah, the other people are absolutely terrified. They wouldn't have me on. And I'll have to admit, I have not been sparse in my criticism of all these other influencers. And if you read From Rome, you see I criticize most, even the articles I agree with, I often criticize something about them. And some people can't take criticism, especially YouTubers, because they're all about personality and identity. And if you say you think they're wrong, they have a mental breakdown. And there is, some can only respond like Ann Barnhart and just trash me and insult me for 40 minutes to get it out of her system, But I'd be willing even to debate Ann Barnhart at any point if there was something we could debate about, but I don't think she's that kind of individual that she could remain calm. I think she would spill over into her execrations, and I'd make a rule that you can't drink liquor during the interview. I'd be willing to debate anyone, talk with anyone. The important people won't talk to me because they would think I'm not an important person. And I'm willing to do the rounds. And even AJ over at Ordo Militaris Radio is willing to have people on. So, if you have a channel and wanting to sub, call up AJ and let's do an interview together and talk about something. Because he actually has a channel that he wants to grow that way. And AJ is hated by this crowd of individuals because he doesn't have a physical appearance, which is, like Ian Carroll. Okay. So, but I see that there's YouTubers like Cinema Shogun who are massively overweight individuals. AJ's not overweight. He's a victim of vaccines and malpractice of doctors. He used to have quite different proportions of body. And but no one wants to go on his channel because they judge him about how he looks, which is It's really shameful. Um, I'm not that kind of person. I don't care whether you're tall, fat, skinny, if your skin is black, white, yellow, whatever, your eyes and things like that. I'm willing to talk to people anywhere. From that point of view, you'd say I'm cosmopolitan. Most of my friends weren't Catholic when I was growing up, so I'm not afraid to speak to Mormons, Muslims, Jews. Um, I think on From Rome, you saw I was interviewed by Dr. Zelensky a couple times, and none of these other people would talk to Dr. Zelensky. And people say, "Do you have any problem talking to him?" I said, "No, certainly not. Just because he's Jewish doesn't mean I won't talk to him." So I could do a lot more on YouTube, but YouTube hates me because they know I'm an anti-globalist. So you see the word Bugnolo in it, and that's you don't get promoted. That's you'd have to be aware of that, Benedicaria. That I am on the top list of hated people. Elon Musk hates me, and Bill Gates hates me, and Klaus von Schwab hates me. The WEF hates me because I took such a strong stand during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I never observed the lockdown. Every day I went out and I violated the rules. I was there praying on Santa Maria Maggiore and doing my live transmissions. So I totally disrespected it because I said, I'm not going to live a lie. That would be shameful. I would rather die than have to live a lie. And so I am on the blackest of blacklists. So I just warn you if you want to interview me. And I thank you for the 13, even though 10 of you are watching. If you have questions, ask questions, because it seems like no one has a question about why the conclave is invalid or something like that. You all agree to that. But I want to thank all of you for helping the Save Rome project. Raise the funds to put up the posters. And the problems here on the ground in Italy are very, very difficult because very few people in Italy still practice the Catholic faith. Most of them are baptized, but like 5% practice. And the 5% in practice are like the little old ladies that say the rosary in church, who have maybe a high school education. I would say that the number of laymen who have college educations that come to daily mass at Rome in the parishes, I'm not talking about the people who work at the Vatican or the people who work in the pontifical universities, the people who are clergy, okay, or seminarians or religious. I'm talking about just lay people in the parishes who come to mass every day, who have college degrees is probably 10% of the 5%. So maybe 0.5% of the entire population of Rome is even capable of understanding this argument, but probably none of them. I have 300. I have like 300 or 400 WhatsApp contacts with my the Italians that I know, and they're absolutely some of them are totally disinterested in who the Pope is, even though they claim to be Catholics. A lot of them are followers of Don Manetella or Cianci, so they don't care what I say anymore. And the others, they don't really care who the Pope is. Coming out, it's really, really bad. The situation is very bad here on the ground of Rome. If someone told me that tomorrow, if God revealed to me in a vision that tomorrow the Antichrist would rise at Rome, I wouldn't even be surprised. God sent an angel telling me that, I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't say you have to work a miracle to prove to me this is going to be true. I would say I already believe it, because the situation at Rome is very, very bad. But as we saw in 1058, it was also very bad because it was only Hildebrand, Peter Damian, and Cardinal Hubert who stood against it. Maybe there's some other people, but we don't know even who their names were or how many they were. And it was probably a small number, because Nicholas II says in his bull in Nomine Domini that when there's a dishonest election at Rome, the Catholics can elect the Pope at any place outside of Rome that's convenient, even if they are few. He says in the Latin, licet paucis, which means even if there's only 2 or 3 of you, And these grifters all go wild because I say, even if we hold an election with 2 or 3, it's going to be valid. They can't stand that because they're there with their YouTube channel. They have their website. They've been there 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, 30 years. Why don't people listen to me? I want influence. I want power in the church. How dare you, Brother Bugnolo, go to Rome? I mean, when I went to Rome, Anne Barnhart had a mental breakdown. She had a mental breakdown because she realized that being at Rome, I could actually do more than, just spout complaints as she does. And, if we elected Cardinal Burke and he accepted it, the election, I don't think these people would accept Cardinal Burke as the Pope if they knew I was present at the election and voted for Cardinal Burke. It's that bad. The level of hatred and envy and jealousy is that bad. And it is envy and jealousy because there's really no other way to explain it. I mean, Benedicaria, religion of error. I don't know what you mean by that phrase. Okay. Oh, Father Covens, welcome to the live stream. Okay. I'm very glad to see you there. And as everyone knows from Rome, Father Covens is the French translator of most of my articles on his own blog. He's published lots of that. He's an expert at translating English to French, French to English, I don't say, English to French. And Father is a great priest and one of the few that will say the truth. And, he hasn't been punished for it, although he's had some hard times with his bishop, things he said. What's your question, Father? If the faithful from Rome elect Prevost as Pope, like they did with Bergoglio, what would make that election invalid that it did not make Bergoglio's election invalid? Father, you're asking me a hypothetical contrary to fact because I will drop dead before I allow Prevost to be elected Pope. Now, I do hold, and everyone knows this, I do hold that an apostolic election could elect a former manifest heretic as Pope, but he would be an impossible Pope. I wrote an article on that. He wouldn't be able to do anything licitly. So what's the purpose of such a Pope? But, if at the election, since I'm the one convoking it, and people say, we want to vote for Leo the 14th, I'm just going to say, I'm not opening this assembly. I'll walk away because I am not going to do that. I'm not going to allow that. The guy is a raving heretic. He's a faker. He's a fraud. He's probably a CIA agent. I'm not going to do that. I would sooner not actually have the election, And as we saw in 1058, St. Hildebrand didn't go to Rome and say, if you want to attend the conclave, if you want to attend the papal election at Siena, come on, all you supporters of Benedict X, and then you can validate it because the election will be valid. They didn't do that. So I'm not under any obligation to ask supporters of Leo the 14th, Don Minutella, or Cenci to come to the election, okay? I'm obliged to ask honest, holy people to come to the election and see that there is an election of an honest, holy person. Otherwise, I'm not going to call the election, okay? And I'm not going to spend the $25,000 raised by the Safe Rome Project on an election that's going to elect a heretic. I mean, that would just be insane. And that's why none of the money has been spent so far. I'm still organizing. But the election will be valid. The question is more who we elect. We have to elect someone that the church will accept. And that's why I am of the opinion that we need a bishop willing to be a candidate. And that's not easy to find. Anne Barnhart, Father Schneider, Matthew Schneider, those two have so burned my personal reputation that I don't think any bishop would even meet with me. So I tell my readers, you need to meet with bishops and find one that's willing to be elected the Pope, because the battle will be intense. It will be intense because unlike in 1058, the Vatican now is a sovereign state. And so the man elected Pope is going to be in a legal conflict with a sovereign state that has security forces, military forces. It's certainly possible of assassinating people, poisoning people, smearing people. Of course, as soon as he's elected, Leo the 14th is going to excommunicate him and try to convince the Catholic world that it's just a bunch of sedevacantists and you shouldn't listen to them. That's going to be all the propaganda points. Burke will come out and say, the opinion that you could hold an election under these circumstances is completely absurd and unprovable. And you'll have lying 24/7 because these people are totally corrupt. So yeah, we need a strong fighter, and that's the kind of man that I would organize election to elect. But I'm not obliged to organize the election. I am not obliged, even though the clergy said you are not opposed me. I am not obliged, even though I've written them and said how they can vote. I'm not obliged until I actually, in the presence of a group of people, say I hereby open the election for the Roman Pontiff. I'm not obliged to say those words. I can talk to all the people coming to vote and say, who do you want to vote for? And if they say we want to vote for Leo the 14th, I'm out of there. And I will not call that election. And they can't call it because it's the clergy who have to convene, or at least someone that the clergy have given tacit consent. And, this is the thing that surprises me, but I won't say anything more about it because I'm not going to see that Leo the 14th is elected. Not in a million years. I can swear and promise to you, I drop deads first. No, the election is not invalid because not all the cardinals elected prevost. No, it's invalid because 133 cast votes at the same time. Regardless, no one in that conclave could have been validly elected from the moment they decided that 133 would vote at the same time. They could have voted for Burke and it would have been invalid. Okay. I haven't, Proclivity of Life says, I haven't taken a look at what Patrick Coffin says these days. Does he accept Leo? I don't know, but I've challenged to debate him on his channel and see if he takes up my challenge. I doubt he will. But Benedictine, I mean carbon issues. Oh, religion of the air. Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, Prevost is going to just, suck up, spit out all the globalism he's sucked up. Oh, I see what you mean. You say the election's invalid because invalid cardinals voted. Okay, well, that's another argument, and certainly a strong one, but I don't use that argument because I'm out to convince everyone. And this live stream is going to go for another hour, so the candidates, we need to find some holy bishops. So Father Covens will be the first to agree with me that it's a hard thing to find a holy bishop. And I can't name individuals that I think might accept because people like Ann Barnhart and Father Matthew Scheider, they're listening right now to this interact. And if I say anything, they'll try to destroy it. So if I named a bishop in, let's say, Piccadilly Circus, they would immediately call him up and say, there's this crazy fraudster by the name of Bugnolo, and he's going to ask you to be Pope. He's totally nuts. Don't listen to him. And his secretary would put my name down and hang up if I called. Because they're evil people and they've given themselves over to Satan. And that's why I publicly can't say anything really about the election. Thankfully, these people aren't at Rome and no one cares about what they say because they don't speak in Italian. But yeah, it is what it is. It's a difficult thing. The other problem here in Italy is that Italy is under a concordat. And in nations that have a concordat with the Apostolic See, the Pope has the authority to appoint the bishops and remove bishops. So it's going to be very hard in those countries to get someone to agree to oppose Prevost because they know that their own government will turn against them if they say Leo is not the Pope. But not all nations have concordance with the Apostolic See, and it's in those nations where they have the liberty, where a bishop can say, you're not the Pope, and he's not going to be removed because he doesn't. The laws of his nation don't require him to resign if the Pope wants him to resign. Only in those nations are we going to be able to find, I think, a bishop who could oppose. Otherwise, we have to elect someone who's not a bishop, and then he has to have friends who are bishops. We're going to consecrate him. Otherwise, he doesn't become Pope until he's consecrated. So I've done the easy part, showing that the conclave is invalid. The difficult part is recruiting a candidate. That's the difficult part. And you all have to help in that. And most of you probably are in parts of the world where you can't help with that. But there are a lot of bishops out there. And it doesn't have to be a bishop who's currently holds an office. He could be retired. Other than that, if we elect someone who's not a bishop, then he has to find a bishop who is willing to consecrate him. And you would think the Society of St. Pius X would agree with that, but I should really not comment on that because I'm calling the election, but I don't have high hopes it would. Maybe he could reconcile some Greek Orthodox schismatics back to the faith, because even though he's not yet the Pope, because he hasn't been consecrated bishop, he could still reconcile bishops to the Catholic faith and bring them back in the unity of the church. That he could do, because that is a particular authority, not supreme authority. He obtains supreme authority once he's consecrated bishop, but from the moment he's elected Pope, according to the teaching of Gregory VII, he already has the right to dispose of all property of the Apostolic See and engage in private acts regarding individuals, like contracts and stuff like that. So you could reconcile individual bishops, not whole dioceses, but individual bishops or clergy back to the Catholic faith, and therefore find 3 bishops to consecrate him Pope, okay, or Bishop of Rome. That's the other way it'd be done. And I'm totally confident that whoever we do elect, the Lord will help him, because the Lord Jesus is going to help this man, because he'll be his vicar on earth. Regardless of how many screaming banshees there are on YouTube or grifters saying otherwise, God will vindicate them, and those who attack him, God will destroy, because that's the truth of the papacy. So very good to see you here, Father Walter. And Father Walter actually resided here in this hermitage for 3 months. 3 months. So Father's been here to Italy with me, and we were going to work on the Scholasticum, but it didn't work out. We didn't really recruit couldn't recruit teachers, and even the one that did agree, Father, he's like, maybe in January I'll do my course. So I think my personal involvement in the controversies over who is Pope is scared off academics, because they don't want it on their resume that they taught at an institute with someone who's freely as speaking as I do. And please like and share this video, this live stream, and ask me questions now. So I'll talk about something I haven't talked about, even if from Rome, is once we elect the Pope, what do we do? Because we can't just elect the Pope at Rome. The Catholics of Rome can't elect the Pope, and then us here, we forget about it. And we have to go on the warpath, in a sense. Because who is going to tell the truth to the world about this man being the Pope? It's going to be us, not just me, all of you in chat, all you listening, all you readers of From Rome. That's why I'm encouraging you to start your own video channels, start your own websites, blogs, because we will have to be his apostles. We will have to be his ambassadors. And some of us, he might even ask to be his nuncios, because he's going to need a staff. He's going to need translators. He's going to need experts. He can't do everything. I mean, he has to establish his own curia. And I really can't see Italians as having the courage to do that. He probably will have to flee to another nation if he's an Italian, and a nation that doesn't have a concord. And he might be in exile his entire papacy. He may not ever return to Rome. He might have to govern the Roman Church through vicars and missionaries and stuff like that. He might have to flee to a country that where he won't be persecuted. He's going to have friends in all the countries around the world that help him do what he needs doing. Because, for example, if he's an Italian citizen, he could come to the United States for 3 months, but he can't stay here. He has to move on, because he couldn't, unless he gets a visa or something. And that's true about any country. So actually, we want to elect someone who has multiple citizenships, so he is free to travel. He'll have more freedom than the Pope, because most countries won't regard him as the Pope. But nevertheless, it takes a really courageous man to say, I'm going to serve Christ even at the cost of renouncing my language, my country, my people, my friends, and going into exile for the rest of my life, trusting that the Lord will vindicate me in my cause. You have to be like a Blessed Urban II. The Italians didn't want him at all. He was elected at Terracina. with a few cardinals and with a priest from Rome who was delegated by some clergy and laity to represent them. And he wandered around Italy, I think, for 2 years. He couldn't find any real support. He did local regional councils, and then he basically fled to France and called the First Crusade. And the French nobility supported him because Odo de Lagares, Blessed Urban II, was of the French nobility. So at least he had social connections. That's why we at Rome, we have to elect someone with social connections, because they're going to be the only people who support him. And who that would be, I don't know, because I'm not I'm not a socialite, a hermit. So we're working on that. And I had hoped we have a Catholic Pope by December, but we may not have one for a year or two, because we have to find a bishop that wants to be elected Pope, or at least a bishop who's willing to consecrate someone who's not a bishop that we elect Pope. So this is a really, really big problem. It's a lot bigger than you thought, a lot bigger than I thought. Mostly because people aren't living in the truth and living according to the truth. Now, you don't have to be a saint to recognize Leo's not the Pope. But once you do recognize he's not the Pope, you're involved in a battle with almost everyone. And it's going to be a battle. And we need a courageous man. And it's going to be hard to find among the episcopacy, I think. For those of you who know anything about the church, I'm sure Father O'Connell's all great. Okay, so the election of Bergoglio, continue with Father's questions, the election of Bergoglio as the Pope on January 30th, 2023 was a valid election. It followed the rules of Nicholas II, and Bergoglio was elected the Pope. Although he was a formal manifest heretic, he was an impossible Pope. It means he didn't have authority to do anything licitly after the fact. They didn't elect him because they felt he was pertinacious in his heresy. The thing with Pope Paul IV, who says that the election of a formal manifest heretic is not valid, the context is clearly a conclave of cardinals and doesn't regard an election by apostolic right. So since we don't have any rule from St. Peter, as St. Alphonsus says in his moral theology, liberty is presumed until there is a restriction by positive law. I am not going to allow I will not allow the election of Leo XIV. But if he was elected, he wouldn't be able to do anything. All his episcopal acts would be invalid, canonically invalid, not sacramentally invalid. And what purpose is that, to go along with people in a line? The election of Bergoglio on January 30th, 2023 was a necessity forced upon the faithful who came to that assembly, precisely because of the treachery of Andrea Tranchi and Don Minutella and all the others who said Benedict would be Pope. Because as soon as Benedict died, they should have all gotten plane tickets to come to Rome and at least witness and encourage the election. And none of them did a blessed thing. And that's a grave moral sin. They were completely dishonest with all their supporters and followers. And none of them showed up. I mean, there is even a man who came all the way from Venice, from Treviso, just to witness the election. And I ate lunch with him afterwards. He couldn't come inside the assembly because he couldn't vote. I wouldn't let him come in. But I said, if you wait till lunchtime, we're going to have lunch together. And a journalist came all the way from, a Jewish journalist came all the way from Israel. Or she works in Tuscany, but she came down and she was present at as a journalist there. She interviewed me, even. They took some photos. If you go on the internet, you can find photos of me in the assembly hall preparing before the election, or maybe they were taken after the election. I forget. And but it was a decision that no one wanted to vote for Pope Francis, but we voted for Pope Francis unanimously because there was nothing else we knew we could do. Perhaps now I know from the events of the election of Blessed Urban II that the assembly doesn't have to elect someone. It can merely delegate one person to act on their behalf. So if we don't, if I call an election and we don't have a candidate, then I'm going to ask um, everyone who's present to delegate one of us to vote for someone when we find a candidate, as was done with Urban II. But I didn't know that back then in 2023, so we just proceeded directly to election of Pope Francis. But if we had, who would have come forward to be the candidate? This is the problem, because everyone is going to be against this election. The Sedevacantists will be against it. The Society of St. Pius X, I think, will be against it. All the traditional bishops will be against it. I think they'll all be against it, you know. But that's only my opinion, you know. It's because I haven't heard any. I would expect that Bishop Fillet have contacted me already. I would expect that Lenga and Vigano would have contacted me, or at least replied to me. I would expect that Bishop Strickland have contacted me. I even expect that Burke would have contacted me and say, we realize the election's invalid and we're organizing another one. Hold off for a month, you know. I would expect that. My disappointment is far greater than I can possibly express in words, because I have very high respect for bishops. And even if I disagree with them, I still respect them as bishops. And my respect for bishops is based on my Catholic faith. It isn't based on my experience of bishops. If I had to base it on my experience of bishops, I'd have no respect for bishops, because except for Bishop Gracida, I have never met a bishop worthy of my respect. But I respect them out of fidelity to Christ, because he established bishops over us. So, excuse me while I get get something for breakfast. Hold a second. So to prepare to help the man who will be elected Pope, we all need to start doing things now. And one of the most important things you can do is catechize the people you know in the Catholic faith, because they have to realize that if they don't want to observe the laws of the church, they cannot be saved. It's not sufficient to accept the Catechism of the Council of Trent. You got to also accept canon law. And this is true even of priests. You're wasting your priesthood if you don't observe canon law, because you're not doing the will of God. Because if a Catholic thinks he can save his soul without observing the laws of the church, he's not going to care who is Pope. And all these people from Michael Matt down to Taylor Marshall, they don't care who is the Pope. So when they tell you they're Catholic, they're just joking. They're just not being honest. Patrick Coffin was one of the few in the English-speaking world that I think basically on his own, he arrived in saying Benedict's still the Pope. And he doesn't have a degree in law or anything. So I have infinitely more respect of Patrick Coffin than I do for a person like Michael Matt, who went to a Catholic school and no better. You know, Michael Matt's not a convert. Like Eric Sammons, I can understand he doesn't understand the faith because he's a convert. Same thing with Taylor Marshall. He's a convert. But you have to love Jesus Christ more than your YouTube channel. And if you don't, you're going to go to hell. Because if you're going to speak in public, you better say the truth, because you're going to be more responsible. And people like Taylor Marshall has an actually doctorate in theology, even though he's a convert. He's going to be under a terrible sentence of justice from our Lord Jesus Christ in the hour of his death, if he doesn't repent for all the lies he's told about who's the Pope and who's not the Pope, which are terrible, horrible lies. And he just lies 24/7 about it. And he doesn't care at all about the people who listen to him, that he's lying. Because he's smart enough that knows that moonist is not the same word as minister. And most of these people hate me because I'll call people liars. Oh, they'll say, you shouldn't call a person a liar unless you know for certain that they're stating a falsehood maliciously. Well, if you tell me the grass is purple and not green, I know you're you're making a false statement maliciously. What can I say? If you say the moon is made of cheese, I know you're a liar. And I'll say in public that you're a liar, because it's not possible that a rational person say such a thing and not know he's lying. Also, if there's a crazy Franciscan brother in Rome who's proven without a doubt that Benedict's the Pope and Leo the 14th is not the Pope, in English, in your own language, that hundreds of your followers are telling you to address, talk about, cite, comment on, and you still say Pope Francis is the Pope and Leo the 14th is the Pope, you're a liar. I don't have to guess about your subjective state of mind, because objective facts, you have to objectively conform to objective facts. They won't even go as far as saying in public, I think Bugnolo is wrong. Because they know as soon as they open that can of worms, someone is going to say to them, how is he wrong? And then they're going to be like, they won't know what to say. I have a very confrere that I'm very friendly with, Father James Velia. And it's not that we're in communication on a regular basis or anything. And someone told me some years ago, he said somewhere that I fear Bugnolo is right. Well, that's at least he mentioned in public. He said it, That's, I respect that infinitely more than people won't even mention it. So there's 13 of you listening, but no one commenting. So I guess the commenters have all gone to bed. But if you're listening to this live video, ask me a question, or at least say hello. Okay? Because I notice there are a lot more people reading from Rome now than are my regular subscribers. And a lot of you are reading the articles on how the conclave is invalid. And it's like you've never seen this before, and no one talks about it, and you're kind of shocked. Ask me a question, even if it's a very simple question, explain a single word or something, because that's what I'm here for. I'll be here on this live feed another 33 minutes. Thank you for the likes. Yeah, a lot of people tell me that, Philomena, that if they mention the Save Rome project, people don't know what to do. They don't know. This is because the Conclave of May 2025 is the most invalid, illegal, immoral conclave to elect a pope in the history of the church. Because they not only violated the papal law, they elected a formal manifest heretic without necessity. And the average Catholic doesn't know how to handle that because we haven't had high clergy admit that there have been anti-popes in a long time. It's not like we're in the Middle Ages. And Catholics say, if I regard Leo the 14th as an anti-pope, where do I go to Mass? Doesn't that put me outside of the church? Because they don't even know how to they don't reason a way a Catholic would be. That if Leo's not the Pope, it's not me in saying that he's not the Pope who's outside of the church. He's outside of the church. And those in communion with him are outside of the church. If they do if they do so maliciously, not out of ignorance. So I can still go to my local parish because my priest is ignorant or he's a coward, Or I haven't talked to him about it yet. Or I don't even know how to explain to it because, he has a degree in canon law. And brother, you're over there in Rome and I can't get him to talk to you. And he's willing to talk to me, but he always belittles me and finds fault what I'm saying because I don't know how to explain this canonically. I'm not going to understand your problem because I think that if I was physically present in your parish and you were standing next to me and your pastor was there and you say, Father, this is Brother Bugnolo. I want you to meet with him. I'd like to make an appointment where we all sit down and discuss whether Leo's the Pope or not. Even if I was there, even if I was a saint, which I'm not, let's say I was a saint and I was levitating, he still wouldn't give us an appointment. That's the state that most clergy are in, alas. And I'm sure Father Covens will confirm what I say. Proclivity of life. Saint our Lord says it will be few. And St. Augustine even says that most Catholics will be damned. St. Alphonsus says that 95, St. Alphonsus said in the 18th century that 95% of all Catholic priests go to hell. I'm a brother, so I've never had to preach the gospel. But if I did, I'd repeat what I just said. But since I'm not a priest, I worry whether I'm going to be saved. I go like, I sweat this. I need to go confession. Do I need to go confession? So I don't worry about how many people will be saved. Personally, I worry whether I'm going to be saved. And I think that's the healthier mindset. Even St. Augustine and St. Alphonsus at their death were like worrying whether they would be saved or not. St. Francis didn't worry whether he'd be saved in death. He was so enwrapped by the love of God, he said, "Strip me bare and put my nude body on the stone floor. Let me die like that, because that's how I came into life." So we should be concerned about it, but we should follow the example of the saints and practice virtue so that at the hour of our death, we're not going to worry whether we're going to be saved. We're impatient to be with God. Benedicarius says, "I thought your videos regarding the election were so brilliant and hoped it would turn the church in the right direction. I watched them at least 5 times each." Yeah. Well, you notice the videos I made this year in May about that, I got so many trolls I had to shut off the comments. But I got 54,000 views on one of them. I think if I didn't shut off the comments, it would have gone higher. Because YouTube will promote your video only if you allow the truth to be attacked. And I can't suffer to see people lie. I would sooner turn off the comments and then give them the chance to say nasty lies. Even if that means no one will hear what I say. John Antolino. Hi, John. I'm surprised it took you so long to get on here, but I know you're not using the internet too much. Says, what do you think of the public positions taken by the parapolitical Catholic influences such as EMJ, Kelly, and others who seemingly never comment on the papacy? Hey, Michael Jones even defended fiducia supplicans, which really surprised me. And makes me wonder if he's really what he claims to be. Kelly, I don't know who you mean by Kelly. Who is Kelly, John? I don't know who Kelly is. Well, I can understand laymen who don't talk about the papacy because they don't know how to talk about it. They're not qualified. No, they think it's totally outside of their realm. But they should at least be honest with their followers and say, in a question and answer, I don't know if he's a valid pope or not. I've heard the arguments against it, and I don't know how to handle it. That would be infinitely more honest than just pretending nothing's going on. Tim Kelly. I don't know who Tim Kelly. I don't know who Tim Kelly is. Never heard of him. And Joe Atwill. I don't know who these people are. So, John, I can't comment. I don't know who these people are. So, this live stream will go another 25 minutes, and I'm doing that because that will make it end around 10 o'clock San Francisco time. And so Atwill wrote the Unzu review about the church being an invention of the Romans. If the church was an invention of Romans, why are there Christian churches in the Holy Land from like the 1st century, 2nd century? Syria. How did the word Christian was invented in Antioch? All scholars agree to that. Also, the word Catholic. So, how is it the Romans invented the church? The church was first in Antioch. Atwill must not have any Lebanese friends. That's all I can say, because just put a Lebanese in the room with him, and he'll either lose the argument or leave with a bloody nose. But some people are willing to say the most absurd things, and that's just Protestant Reformation slop propaganda, saying the Romans invented the church. Oh boy. I guess Christ never said, upon this rock I will found my church. Our Lord was involved in a plot with Romans. He's doing a deal in the background with Pontius Pilate. Oh boy. Okay. Denver Pushpan SJ. Well, Denver Pushpan, that doesn't sound like a real name, but if it is, excuse me for saying what I just said. And are you actually a Jesuit? Are you a heretic or a schismatic? Have you come to decide who is not rightful? Are you God? Well, I think that if you are asking those questions, you're definitely not a Jesuit, okay? Because I don't know what you're asking there, if you say that again in more precise language, because it seems like you just are a Protestant, you're trolling me. I don't know. Certainly don't seem to be a Jesuit, because I don't think Jesuits ever use the word heretic anymore, at least, let alone schismatic. Are the Greek Orthodox schismatic? I don't think any Jesuit would say that today. And I guess you're a latecomer, since I've been here 2.5 hours, and I think I've already answered the question. Have you come to decide who is not? I don't know why you write rightful, because rightful is a word we don't normally use in American English. And the question, are you God? I don't know any Jesuit would have asked that. There's not many Jesuits today who believe in God. So if you rephrase your question, then maybe we'll understand what you're saying. And if you're not a native speaker of English, you might want to check your translation. Okay. John Antonino. And Kelly promotes himself as a trad dad of 9, yet I can't find anything about him like Jackson. Oh, Tim Kelly. Maybe I've heard of that name. Yeah, I know. People on social media, they claim something and you don't know anything about them. I noticed that the ballistic experts who are talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination, at least they're saying who their real name is. And then they're saying, I was in the military for so many years, I've been running a training course so many years. They tell you something about them so you know their expertise. They just don't claim to speak. This is a big problem on social media. I just don't claim to speak. Benedictari says, if you got my email, connect with me. I think we will have an in-depth, very enjoyable conversation. I will stream it on several platforms. Thank you, Benedicaria. I can check your comment email later once this live stream ends. I don't want to do it during the stream because I'm streaming through a browser window. And I think if I flip it off, I might have problems. So I'm not going to do that. Benedict, Denver Pushpam SJ. Pope Benedict XVI of blessed memory spoke clearly in Latin. After examining his conscience before God, he was renouncing the chair of St. Peter as Pope, and that a conclave must be convoked. Okay, Denver, or if you're a Jesuit, I'll assume you're a priest. I'll say Father Denver, unless you're Brother Denver, you're a Jesuit brother. I'll assume now that you are a Jesuit because you wrote a coherent sentence that I can understand. Okay, so I am the Latin scholar who identified more than 40 errors in the Latin of the Declaratio read by Pope Benedict this 16th on the 11th of February, 2013. And I have been acknowledged as such, even in L'Avvenire, the national Catholic paper of the Italian Bishops' Conference of Italy. And even though they got an ex-priest to write an article ridiculing me, claiming I was an idiot for finding 43 errors. But 2 years later, Archbishop Ganswein, who is now the papal nuncio in Lithuania, admitted that there were errors in the Latin of Pope Benedict. I don't think he'd probably agree with all my errors that I discovered, but they're errors. So when I say error, I mean the way Latin should be used according to the monuments of history. So in the English-speaking world, we approach Latin from a different point of view than the Italians. Okay, so you see, I keep a Latin dictionary always near me. We look at how Virgil used Latin, how Cicero used Latin, how all the great Latin authors of the classical world use Latin. For example, in using the verb blah, 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 how did they use that verb? Did they use it with an accusative for a direct object or indirect object? Did they use that in subordinate clauses? How did they use it? And on that basis, reading the Latin of Benedict, I found 40 or more errors. And I agree, some of them are merely stylistic, but others are actually grammatical. And if you come to fromrome.info and use the search function at the website and type index, it will come up, it will give you a result saying the index to the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. And if you open up that document, which has, I think, more than 100 links in it, you will see a collection of all my articles about the Declaratio of Pope Benedict, the actual text in Latin. I gave 3 translations, 3 ways of translating it. I also commented on the other translations the Vatican published, and I have all the controversies there. So he didn't speak clearly in Latin. If it was his intention to use Latin according to the grammatical rules, his Latin is really bad. But that doesn't mean he didn't purposely intend to use bad Latin. He might have, and we still don't know about that. After examining his conscience before God, he was renouncing the chair of Peter. Well, actually, in that Latin text, I challenge you to find the phrase chair of St. Peter. That's not in that text. So okay, so, and I have written probably 100 articles about the Declaratio of Benedict, and I can tell you that Benedict XVI did not say what you claim he's saying. I cannot answer the question whether he knew he was not saying what you claim he was saying. I can only judge what he actually said in Latin, how it really means. And in one of my 3 translations, I actually translated the way he actually, in English, with all the errors he has in Latin, as much as you can translate errors in Latin into English, and you'll see how totally absurd what he said is. Benedicaria. I noticed that it was removed from this chat. I assume it was YouTube. Benedicaria, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't removed anyone's comment from this chat. Denver, Pushpam again, or Father Denver. He has problems with the recent papacy. What about the medieval popes, Rodrigo de Borgia, Giuliano di Rovere, who fought for the papacy, resorted to immoral means like simony? I don't know if you mean when you say he has problems with the recent papacy. How about medieval popes? Hey, I'm of Italian heritage. I know about the scandals of the medieval popes, but they were all elected according to the rules. And whether a pope is immoral or not, you know, whether he has 5 mistresses or 4 little boys on the side, doesn't mean his election's valid or that he's a heretic. Might mean that he's immoral. And if I were a priest and I were the confessor of a pope's immoral, I would tell him he should resign. Probably wouldn't stay as confessor for long, and I wouldn't grant him absolution until he did. But you see, I'm not a priest. So, but those don't affect the canonical validity of a papal election. So, Praetor Rem. Revelation. I don't know whether to laugh at your comment or the fact that your comment and your name on YouTube just go together so well. Denver again says, I think this man is psychology troubled, having not got the episcopate, forgot the papacy. Denver, your English isn't so well. You're probably using a translator, and what you're saying doesn't make sense. So I can't get your joke. Denver says again, yes, defending the rightful church against Arians, Nestorians, and this new heretical group. I don't. None of us have even talked about doctrines. I don't know if we could be heretics. Revelation. Speaking of heretics, what about your fellow? Oh, okay, so you're having a conversation with one another. Okay. The comments are supposed to be for you to ask me questions. I mean, if you're going to start bashing each other in the comments, what's the purpose of that? There's so many other channels you can do that on. But I tend to think that Denver Pushpam, SJ, is not a Jesuit. Okay. Because Jesuits are highly educated individuals and know how to write English. And Denver doesn't seem to know that. He seems to know it sometimes and not other times. So I don't think he's a Jesuit. Philomena. Okay. If you were Jesuit, Denver Pushpam, you would know that I'm not a heretic. Because if what I said in these moments that you've been in chat makes me a heretic. Oh boy, imagine what the people who live in the same house with you, and the Jesuits who live with you, if you're a Jesuit, which I don't think you are. Okay, so a little spice at the end of the conversation. Do you have any other revelation? Are you having an argument with one another? No, I'm not going to do a breakfast with brother. John, I know some people would like me to be on the internet every day, but I'm not that kind of person. I'm a hermit. I live as a hermit life. I live by myself. I don't even talk to myself during the day. I don't play music during the day. I say my prayers. I think about God. I try to attend what I think is His word is, but going on social media is something I really have to force myself to do because I'm not that kind of person. I'm not a socialite, the kind of things like that. And to what end would I go on the internet? To run my mouth and be more judged by God? Well, maybe so, John. Now that YouTube claims they're not going to censor people, maybe so. You'll see me, for those who are interested, on Monday on Rumble on Dr. Jane Ruby's channel. There will be she will publish an interview she did with me the other day. So you'll hear us talk about various issues, mostly the Charlie Kirk assassination, which I follow very closely, and I give my opinion about that there. Denver. Okay, so I don't know what you mean by the LGBT thing, but if you're talking about fiducia supplicans, Christ never blessed sinners. Okay, doesn't publicly approve of sin, and He didn't establish the priesthood to give blessings of Mithra or blessings of Jupiter. He established the priesthood so that all His priests be His priests and give blessings according to His rules. And if you're a Catholic priest or even a Catholic priest who's also Jesuit, you can only act as a priest according to Christ's rules. If you don't want to follow Christ's rules, do everyone a favor, resign, and go join some Buddhist commune or something like that. But don't tell people that what your opinion is Catholic if you don't want to agree with the Catholic faith. Okay, so yeah, we have 10 more minutes, and then this program will end. And I wanted to do it because I wanted to give everyone in the English-speaking world a chance to ask me questions about the conclave. But you are most of my just devoted fans from Rome, so I didn't really get any good questions at all about it. But I made an effort, so no one says I didn't want to speak about it. And once the new pope's elected, I guess I'll be doing lots of video because I'll be one of his chief defenders. And God willing, that we can do this year and not have to go years just finding a Catholic bishop. I don't know. I really worry about the Church of God. And I find it disappointing that we have more people trolling than clergy approving. Father Walter says that Father Denver is from India. He's doing a juniorette at Vinyalaya, Mumbai. Okay, so Denver Pushpama is your real name? Okay. Excuse me for making fun of your name, because in English, your name almost sounds like, you know, a name someone from Denver, Colorado would say. Okay, so thank you for stopping by, Denver Pushpamas J. But if you're in novitiate, you shouldn't be on YouTube. Because in the novitiate, you're supposed to be secluded. That's the rule. You shouldn't be on social media. So you have a very lax house, and you're going to lose your vocation unless you read the writings of St. Ignatius and the fathers and doctors of the church and try to learn the life of prayer. And so God bless you. I'll assure you of my prayers. Leave it to Father Walter to be our intelligence expert. 8 more minutes. Anyone ask a question? Father Walter, you usually can ask a good question. There must be some really good question you want to ask me. Ask me here about it that I might be able to answer, because you could probably think of a question to answer. It seems everyone else can't really think of a question. If you haven't given a like to this video, please like it. And obviously you're subscribed, because if you weren't subscribed, you couldn't comment here. That's how I set up the thing. But still, the likes are good. And so just to inform you, I don't plan I'll do indirect, but I guess I'll be doing a video on Benedict Carrier's platform, and she invited me. And any of you others who run platforms, if you want to have me on, because only my fans really watch my channels, and it's pretty limited. It's not like I have thousands of followers even from Rome. I think I have, you're actually a very small crowd, actually. The number of subscribers to this channel is like 10 times more than on From Rome, but I don't think everyone on subscribed to this channel even gets the notices. Philomena, you asked me a question that is beyond my competence to answer. And even if it wasn't beyond the competence of my answer, I cannot answer that question publicly for security reasons. So, but once he's elected, his election has to be announced. He can't be a secret pope. So, but it is possible maybe that his election won't be announced until he's in a place where he's not in the country under the concordat with the Vatican, so that he can avoid being arrested. Because it's highly possible. I'm not saying it's highly possible, because I'm not an expert in civil law, but I think it is possible that in Italy, someone who's elected Roman pontiff to oppose Leo XIV might be arrested for being an imposter, or for attempting to overthrow the Vatican city-state government, or something like that. So maybe he will only accept his election once he's in a country where that's not a risk. And but it's not clear to me that he could be so arrested, because we're not going to elect someone to be the head of state of the Vatican, and we're not planning to overthrow the Vatican. We're not planning military action against the Vatican. And we really don't care whether the Vatican goes to hell or not. We just want a bishop at Rome. Your father asked the question, when do you think the election will take place, and what about fundraising to finance the election? Well, so far, 25,000 has been raised for the election. And as it states in the Fund Run project, that was to pay for posters to call people together to an election. And anything left over will be donated to the new Pope. 25,000 is really only enough to put posters in all the towns of the province of Rome. It wouldn't be enough to like rent a place to use unless it's an empty field. And I have not yet decided the date of the election or the place or the time. And even if I did, I would not announce that here, because there are evil people who would take that information, call up the Italian police, and have them arrest everyone who's on site. So you will only know the election after the fact. Italian law will not allow me to say who was present at the election, because there's rules of privacy, and I can't divulge private information about individuals without their permission. So I'll be able to tell you one day in the future where it took place, when it took place, and something about who attended, and obviously who was elected, and when he accepted his election, but it won't be immediate for all those reasons. And as far as the fundraising goes, I want to thank everyone who's donated, the money that's so far been donated. And well, if we had a really big donor, then I could do a lot more than I could do. But with the 25,000, I could choose to put up the posters, or I could handle the election another way. The Save Rome project I launched before I knew what Nicholas II taught. And so my intention was to get tens of thousands of Catholics together who would elect the Pope. But nearly every city in the Roman province is controlled by a communist mayor. I don't think I'd ever get permission to organize such a public event. So I believe our election will have to be done at a private place. So I'm if you noticed, I'm not asking people personally to donate to the Save Rome project anymore. You noticed that since the beginning of September, I'm not. I might mention the Save Rome project. Someone knows about it, but I'm not asking you to support it. If you want to support it, that's fine. But because the money will go to the new Pope, and that will help him at least with his initial expenses. But unless we got a benefactor that donated like $1 million, I don't think the manner of election will be other than I just said it will be, because there's because all these other problems with organizing a public meeting to elect someone who would be immediately accused, or the election would be immediately accused of attempting to overthrow the Vatican government. I don't see it that way, but I think people could accuse me and others of doing that, and that's not what we're doing. So, hey, there were popes elected at Cluny in Burgundy. Not all the popes have been elected, even in Italian territory. So, I can't say anything more about it than that, for reasons of security. But that is a good question. I can't tell you when the election. I would like to take it place as soon as possible, but I can tell you it will take place when it is possible and when the juridical conditions are met. Because I want a credible election that the church can accept. I don't want an election that's not credible, even though it is juridically valid. For example, the election in 2023 on January 30th was juridically valid, but most people found it incredible. That was not so much a problem since we voted for Bugnolo. Whether they thought it was credible or not didn't matter. Because people already thought Pope Francis was the Pope. But in this election, since we're not going to elect Leo the 14th, we have to meet higher criteria on credibility. Okay, 3 hours have passed. That is the end of this live stream. I want to thank you for listening the whole way through and for being present. Thank you, especially Father Covens, for coming in, because Ann Bartonhart is put out the lie that you and I hate one another and you'll never speak to me again. So your presence here debunks her propaganda. I want to thank you all. God bless you. And let's keep praying. But those of you who live in countries, wherever you are in the world, you need to talk to retired bishops. You need to talk to clergy. We need to prepare the ground for the election of the Pope so that when he is elected, they'll accept him, and that we find a candidate to elect. And because every Pope opposing an anti-Pope was elected only because Catholics got together and formed a coalition of bishops to accept his election. Without that, they didn't act. So God bless you, one and all. And now I'll end the stream.